And my job has been made easy by the opening remarks by Dr. Sabrina. So I need not do any introduction. And Dr. Shahira will be watching over me on the flow of the events. So I'm purely assisting, accompanying the speakers, so they don't feel lonely. So, okay, we know that development agenda cannot be stopped. As far as human being is concerned, development is always there and will forever be there. But development has the tendency to transform life and transform cities. And at the same time, cultural heritage conservation and preservation is to prevent development causing detrimental effect to the cultural property. And at many of the times, we were seen as anti-development, which we definitely not. What we are attempting is to strike the balance between the desire, the needs to keep the heritage intact, and at the same time allowing the development to proceed. So in that case, in that sense, we have to develop sustainably. We know that in the SDG 17, probably SDG 11 is the closest to heritage conservation under the title of Sustainable Cities and Communities. And in the case of English heritage, they already venture into the dimension of climate change, which is SDG 13, and the challenges facing historic sites. Energy efficient also being identified as things should be looked after in the course of safeguarding the heritage. So I'm not here to present anything to you because we are well supported by the 4 esteemed speakers who are very well versed in their field and expertise. So without further ado, I would like to, am I calling the speaker or Shaira?
Yeah, it's okay, Prof. Syed. You can also call
Okay.
the speakers and we will share the brief bio.
Okay.
Yes.
So according to the itinerary that we have, the first speaker will be yang berusaha Encik Muhammad Azmi Muhammad Yusof, the Director General of Jabatan Warisan Negara. Dengan segala hormatnya, dipersilakan.
Okay.
Apa khabar Tuan?
Alhamdulillah, Prof. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'll be presenting in Malay as our heritage is a Malay tongue, so I'll be presenting in Malay so that it's okay, isn't it?
Okay,
Okay,
kita nak perkenalkan kita punya keynote speaker kita yang pertama, our distinguished speakers. Saya akan sharekan slide and then maybe kita boleh tengok sikit lah ya di ni sebentar ya. Sekejap ya, saya sharekan. Dah keluar tak ya? Saya Okay, Prof Syed nak bacakan a bit of the brief bio of the
Please proceed, Syed.
okay, bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Okay, terima kasih yang berusaha Encik Muhammad Azmi for being with us today. Ketua Pengarah dan juga Pesuruhanjaya Warisan Jabatan Warisan Negara. Beliau dilahirkan pada 1 Januari 1962 di Mentakap, Pahang. Beliau telah mendapat pendidikan awal bermula di sekolah rendah dan menengah di Pahang bermula 1977 hingga 1981. Pada tahun 1985, beliau telah melanjutkan pengajian di Universiti Malaya dalam ijazah sarjana muda, Bachelor of Hons, Antropologi, Sosiologi dan seterusnya, melanjutkan pengajian di peringkat sarjana Master Sains dalam bidang sejarah di Universiti Paris pada 1996. Beliau pernah memegang jawatan penting di beberapa tempat seperti pengarah Jabatan Museum Malaysia Wilayah Selatan, pengarah bahagian pendidikan dan dokumentasi Jabatan Museum Malaysia pada 2013, pengarah Museum Negara pada 2008 dan 2014, ahli panel pakar MQA pengukuran standard pengajian sains informasi pada 2012-2013, pensyarah sambilan dalam bidang diploma eksekutif fisiologi di Fakulti Alam Bina UIA pada tahun 2009 hingga 2012 dan sebagai timbalan ketua pengarah pemuziuman pada 2015-2020. Antara ceramah beliau di pembentangan kertas kerja seperti Malaysian Museum and its Development, sempena khusus di Museum Professional Heritage Management, Negara Jepun, anjuran UNESCO pada tahun 2001 dan banyak lagi yang berkaitan dalam bidang pemuziuman. Okey, terima kasih yang berusaha Encik Muhammad Aziz bersama kita pada hari ini. Thank you.
Okay, silakan Tuan Muhammad Azmi.
Okay, terima kasih sekali lagi lah. So terima kasih kepada moderator kerana memperkenalkan. Sebenarnya tidak banyak yang saya nak kupaskan hari ini, cuma apa yang penting pada saya ialah kita perlu mengenali beberapa pendekatan yang penting, terutama dalam kerangka Jabatan Warisan dan juga Akta Warisan. Seperti mana semua sedia maklum bahawa Malaysia ni mempunyai sejarah yang panjang. Sejarah yang berpanjang bermula kalau dari hasil research yang kita telah laksanakan dan juga penemuan-penemuan membuktikan bahawa warisan kita telah bermula di sekitar abad keempat lagi, dan perkara ni kita boleh tengok dari penemuan-penemuan yang terkini di Sungai Batu, Lembah Bujang, dan selepas itu diwarnai dengan pelbagai rencah pentadbiran bermula dari Melaka 1400 dan seterusnya lah kepada hingga kini. Dan kita lihat banyak perkara-perkara yang berlaku tentang sejarah kita. Cuma apa yang berlaku sekarang ialah sehingga bermula dari tahun abad ke-4 hingga tahun 57, kita tidak mempunyai apa-apa peruntukan perundangan yang dikhususkan untuk memberi satu pendekatan atau peruntukan untuk memelihara dan memelihara warisan kita. Hanya ini sedikit latar belakang dia sebelum kita pergi kepada Akta Warisan Kebangsaan 2005. Dan kita mempunyai hanya Akta Harta Karun 1957, Akta 542. Yang ini hanya berkisar kepada harta-harta yang tertanam di dalam perut bumi dan tidak menyentuh, seperti tajuk hari ini yang saya dia beri ialah tentang seni bina, tapi tidak menyentuh tentang seni bina, ya. Dan keduanya telah digubah juga satu akta yang di mana akta ini telah diberikan mandat kepada Jabatan Museum lah pada ketika itu Jabatan Museum Negara dan bertukar kepada Jabatan Museum dan Antiquity, dan iaitu Akta Benda Purba, Akta 168 yang mengkhususkan pada ciptaan manusia yang sama ada yang alih atau tidak alih. Ini tentang budaya-budaya alih dan tidak alih. Tapi tidak spesifik mengenai tentang pelestarian warisan seni bina itu sendiri. Dan di samping itu ada juga akta-akta lain yang turut memberikan satu pendekatan tapi tidak menyeluruh, iaitu Akta Kerajaan Tempatan 1976, Akta 175 yang memperuntukkan PBT sebagai custodian atau penjaga pada warisan, tapi tidak memberi satu yang penekanan spesifik. Selain daripada itu, kita juga ada Akta Perancang Bandar dan Desa 1976. Bila kita tengok dari segi kronologi ini, kita tengok bahawa pada ketika itu warisan, terutama warisan seni bina, tidak diberi satu penekanan yang kuat dalam memelihara dan melihara. Dan dari itu kita boleh lihat banyak perkara-perkara dalam tempoh tersebut berlaku, kemusnahan, kerosakan dan sebagainya lah, tentang warisan-warisan seni bina yang boleh dijadikan sebagai satu produk pada kita dan juga sebagai satu inspirasi atau pemupukan jati diri kepada bangsa, ya. Namun begitu, bila kita tengok pada kedua-dua akta yang spesifik tentang perkara ini, kita melihat bahawa kedua akta tidak mempunyai banyak kelemahan tersendiri yang tidak merangkumi section-section atau peraturan-peraturan dalam melindungi dan memelihara dan mengekalkan warisan budaya. Sepanjang tempoh tersebut tidak ada akta atau peraturan khusus yang digubah dan diwujudkan dalam memelihara warisan di Malaysia secara komprehensif. Jadi atas faktor itulah di sini dijelaskan bahawa telah digubah satu akta, ya, satu akta yang lebih spesifik lah, lebih komprehensif mengenai warisan kita. Dan saya dari sini saya mengambil kesempatan lah untuk mengucapkan syabas kepada UTM sendirilah kerana berjaya menganjurkan webinar ini yang merupakan satu usaha dalam memberi pendedahan dan pemahaman kepada masyarakat tentang warisan negara dan membudayakan perkongsian ilmu khususnya berkaitan seni bina, ya. Saya juga ingin mengucapkan tahniah sebab ini selaras dengan kita sekarang. Kita mempunyai tagline kita dan kita perlu mendekatkan pada masyarakat, iaitu dengan tagline kenali, sayangi dan lestarikan warisan kita. Ini adalah satu inisiatif dari Jabatan Warisan lah untuk mengenengahkan mendekatkan masyarakat kepada warisan, ya. Seperti yang saya sudah maklum tadi, seni bina Malaysia telah melalui jalur evolusi yang panjang, ya, dinamik dan amat menarik untuk direndungi dan dihayati bersama. Kita harus bersyukur kerana masih terdapat banyak tapak-tapak atau monumen serta bangunan sejarah yang masih wujud di bersejarah yang masih wujud di Malaysia, dan ianya merupakan satu kapsul masa yang menyimpan legasi sejarah dan memberi bukti fizikal kepada evolusi tersebut. Sekadar merujuk kepada beberapa lah contoh seperti tapak ritual Sungai Batu, rumah penghulu Mat Data, rumah penghulu Abdul Ghani di Merlimau, deretan kedai-kedai tradisional Cina di Melaka dan Pulau Pinang, bangunan Sultan Abdul Samad, panggung Odeon, Museum Negara sehingga bangunan Kuala Lumpur City Centre yang terletak di tengah bandaraya Kuala Lumpur merupakan antara entiti yang memaparkan serta memperlihatkan sisi istimewa seni bina di Malaysia, ya. Malahan perkembangan teknologi bina juga dapat dilihat, ya. Dapat dilihat dari transisi teknologi yang mudah dan ringkas kepada teknologi bina yang bersifat lebih teknikal dan kompleks. Selain dari itu, local genius atau kearifan tempatan turut menyumbang kepada kepelbagaian ragam, hias dan motif ukuran yang memberi warna dan keunikan kepada seni bina di Malaysia. Justru dapat dilihat adunan seni bina Melayu, Eropah dan Cina, India, ya. Kalau seperti semua boleh lihat di skrin. Dan Islam telah menjadi ramuan dan memberi pengaruh dan menyumbang kepada pembentukan identiti seni bina yang tersendiri hingga menyebar luas ke negeri-negeri Melayu, negeri Selat dan Nusantara pada ketika itu, ya. Saya percaya kehebatan dan keunggulan sebuah negara bukan hanya dilihat daripada ketinggian dan kehebatan bangunan pencakar langit yang mempunyai visual yang futuristik serta moden, tapi bangunan-bangunan warisan juga mempunyai peranan menjadi penentu kepada pembentukan karakter sesebuah negara, ya. Kenyataan ini tidak dapat disangkal bila mana bangunan-bangunan warisan yang terdapat di Malaysia merupakan soul atau jiwa kepada negara yang menjadi jendela waktu untuk kita melirik masa silam dalam melangkah ke hadapan untuk mengejar pembangunan dan modernisasi, ya. So saya atas kita boleh tengok bahawa ada beberapa aspek yang kita boleh tekankan dalam akta tersebut, ialah dalam pengubahan akta disebabkan kelemahan kewujudan akta benda purba dan akta harta karun, kerajaan telah menggariskan atau cuba mewujudkan satu akta iaitu yang dinamakan Akta Warisan Kebangsaan 2005, Akta 645 pada tahun 2005. Ia merupakan satu langkah yang responsif kerajaan dalam atas kesedaran dalam aspek pemeliharaan dan pemeliharaan warisan negara agar tidak sirna di asap gelombang modernisasi, ya. Ini adalah salah satu usaha kerajaan untuk mengekalkan warisan kita, ya. Akta ini memberi satu peruntukan bagi perlindungan ke atas hazanah warisan negara di mana merangkumi pemeliharaan dan pemeliharaan warisan kebangsaan, warisan semula jadi, warisan kebudayaan ketara dan tidak ketara. Ini lebih menyeluruh dari segi aspek dia lebih menyeluruh. Dia termasuk juga warisan kebudayaan bawah air, harta karun serta perkara-perkara yang berkaitan. Ini kita lihat di dalam akta ini digariskan ada 17 bahagian, diberikan 17 bahagian secara detail lah. Kalau kita rujuk balik kepada akta benda purba, perkara ini tidak dirangkumkan dalam tu. Cuma dalam akta, dalam 17 bahagian secara keseluruhan yang menyentuh peranan Jabatan Warisan dalam memelihara, terdapat satu bahagian iaitu bahagian 7 yang mana dia menyentuh tentang keseluruhan bagaimana kita melaksanakan tanggungjawab sebagai custodian atau penjaga kepada warisan. Di sini kita boleh tengok ada sekejap, ya. Ada beberapa perkara yang telah digariskan di sini. Ya, seumpamanya kita melihat kepada pendaftaran. Okey. Kita boleh lihat dalam bab ini iaitu bab 1 bahagian 7 tapak warisan seperti yang kita ia memberikan kuasa kepada Pesuruhjaya untuk membuat penetapan tapak-tapak ini di bawah section dan kemudiannya tapak-tapak persepadanan dan berdekatan dan pemeriksaan tapak notis kepada pemunya bantan ini sampai kepada section 40 di mana perkara ini perlu diberikan satu penegasan supaya warisan seni bina itu tidak musnah, ya. Yang selanjutnya kita boleh tengok selain daripada peranan tersebut, Jabatan Warisan juga bertanggungjawablah untuk diberi tanggungjawab untuk menetapkan menjalankan penyelidikan, pelindungan, pemeliharaan dan pendaftaran. Selain dari itu penguatkuasaan dan juga pencalonan lah. Ini adalah dasar atau fungsi Jabatan Warisan sendiri selepas ia ditubuhkan berikutan dengan adanya akta terbentuknya akta pewarisan kebangsaan 2005 ya. Selain daripada menjalankan penyelidikan dan dokumentasi, Jabatan Warisan juga ya diberi mandat sebagai antara state party bagi tugas-tugas mendapatkan pencalonan. Ini adalah peranan sejajar dengan kalau dulu kita tidak nampak bahawa antara akta-akta yang sebelum ada boleh mengangkat lebih tinggi atau boleh memelihara lebih berkesan tentang warisan-warisan yang ada, tapi akta warisan yang ada sekarang ni dia lebih komprehensif bila dia meletakkan bukan saja untuk mewarta atau melindungi tapak-tapak itu, selain dari menjaga, ia juga memberi satu fungsi yang itu mengangkat warisan-warisan kita hingga ke peringkat dunia ya. Kita dapat lihatlah jadi beberapa kejayaan dan pengiktirafan yang kita telah dapat dari United Nations Education, Scientific dan Culture Organization atau UNESCO ya. Sehingga kini terdapat 4 tapak warisan lah. Tapak warisan di Malaysia yang telah mendapat pengiktirafan sebagai tapak warisan dunia UNESCO, iaitu Taman Negara Gunung Mulu, Taman Kinabalu Melaka dan Georgetown, dan Tapak Arkeologi Lembah Lenggong. Di samping itu ya, Jabatan juga telah berjaya meletakkan beberapa warisan kita di bawah kategori Memory of the World. Antaranya ialah surat Sultan Abdul Hamid, manuskrip sejarah Melayu, manuskrip Hang Tuah, batu bersurat, manuskrip cerita Panji dan beberapa lagi di bawah Memory of the World International Register. Ini adalah salah satu dari fungsi kita untuk melestarikan dan mengangkat dan mempertabatkan. Selain daripada itu, Jabatan juga sebagai state party mengangkat beberapa performance atau persembahan seperti Dongeng Sayang, Silat, Upacara Wangkang, dan yang paling terbaru pada 15 hari bulan Disember baru ini ialah Songket yang telah diangkat sebagai the representative list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity. Ini adalah salah satu dari kerangka peranan. Selain daripada peranan instrumen yang kita kata tadi, akta warisan untuk memelihara warisan seni bina, peranan itu juga peranan untuk mengangkat dan mempertabatkan warisan-warisan yang ada hingga ke peringkat dunia juga telah dilaksanakan ya. Ini menunjukkan bahawa akta yang ada ketika ini, itu akta warisan, merupakan akta warisan kebangsaan 2005, merupakan instrumen yang paling komprehensif, walaupun masih terdapat beberapa kelemahan yang boleh, sebab kalau nak diikutkan, kalau dari dulu 2006 hingga tu, kita dapati hanya kita ni dalam lingkungan masih muda lah, dalam usia 17-16 tahun. Jadi masih banyak lagi yang kita perlu tangani dalam kita menguatkuasakan atau memelihara warisan-warisan yang ada ya. Selain daripada itu, kita juga dalam aspek pemeliharaan seni bina seperti yang dikhususkan tadi, kita juga mempunyai satu kerangka pelan yang dengan bersama dengan Kementerian Pelancongan Seni dan Budaya, iaitu menyediakan pelan pengurusan lah. Pelan pengurusan ni kalau kita tengok di bawah akta ini ialah dia merangkumi kepada perkara sekejap maaf. di bawah Seksyen 46 ya, bila mana adanya akta atau seksyen yang memperuntukkan bahawa keperluan pada pemeliharaan dan pengurusan tapak-tapak. Yang ini yang kita tengok bahawa adanya usaha-usaha pelihara aset warisan negara itu dirancang dan dilaksanakan. Pelan kondusif yang kondusif ni sejajar dengan matlamat kerajaan sendiri yang sekarang memberikan satu penekanan yang tinggi kepada warisan-warisan yang terdapat di negara kita ya. Dalam aspek pemeliharaan dan pemeliharaan khazanah warisan negara berkaitan warisan seni bina, kita juga dikemaskan dengan beberapa pendekatan-pendekatan lain lah yang boleh mengukuhkan lagi, sepertinya kebenaran merancang dan kebenaran ini adalah tertakluk di bawah bidang kuasa yang ada dalam akta tu. Jadi daerah sekarang ni kalau kita mengambil contoh sebelum wujudnya akta warisan, kita boleh tengok ada pembangunan-pembangunan di sekitar Bandaraya Kuala Lumpur yang telah menyebabkan bangunan warisan yang mempunyai signifikan nilai warisan terpaksa korban memberi laluan kepada pembangunan. Antaranya lah mungkin semua tahulah yang di Kuala Lumpur, contohnya penjara Pudu. Penjara Pudu ni merupakan salah satu aset warisan kalau kita diambil kategorikan yang berusia dalam lingkungan 1870-an itu telah habislah bagi memberi, telah dimusnahkan lah bagi memberi laluan kepada pembangunan. Begitu juga rumah Agam Bok di Jalan Ampang, bangunan Serani Port Road di Jalan Raja Curan, dan jika sekiranya lah kita perkara ini tak dikawal, yang akan datang pun akan berlaku lah tentang kemusnahan-kemusnahan ini ya. So dalam akta warisan ni, dalam memelihara ni adalah salah satu aspek yang penting yang perlu kita fahami ialah memang kita kebanyakan bangunan, memang banyak orang berkata tentang warisan ni, tapi bila tidak diwartakan, kita tidak mempunyai bidang kuasa untuk menjalankan usaha-usaha perlindungan. Dan salah satu yang paling penting dalam akta yang kita bangunkan ini, dalam mengawal ini, ialah pewartaan. Pewartaan adalah salah satu daripada aspek yang sangat penting bila mana dalam pewartaan ini dia memerlukan kerjasama antara dua pihak lah. Bukan saja pihak-pihak yang mencalonkan, tapi pihak berkuasa negeri. Kita sering berhadapan dengan masalah bila mana adanya dispute antara pihak negeri dengan pihak federal. Kadang-kadang kita mendapat pencalonan dari NGO atau badan-badan tertentu tentang tapak-tapak warisan. Tapi untuk kita mendapatkan, sebab biasanya kalau tapak-tapak seni bina ni, dia akan terangkum dalam enactment tanah negeri masing-masing. Dan di situlah biasanya akan berlakulah timantara atau negotiation ke atau selanjutnya lah supaya tapak itu dapat diwartakan atau dipelihara. Biasanya kadang-kadang pewartaan yang berlaku ni akan menjalani masalah bila mana pihak berkuasa negeri tidak setuju. Tidak setuju, and then ada badan-badan atau agensi tertentu setuju untuk diwartakan, tapi bila kita melihat kepada keperluan di bawah enactment tanah negeri, dia menolak. Sebab kita nakkan supaya kedua-dua pihak faham bahawa instrumen akta warisan ini hanya memberikan suatu kuasa bagi kita untuk menjaga sesuatu tapak. Dan selebihnya kita melihat di bawah akta yang ada ni, di bawah penjagaan bangunan, dia dah menjadi tanggungjawab pemunya sendiri untuk melaksanakan pemugaran dengan bantuan kerajaan. Itu saja. Kadang-kadang salah faham ini berlaku bila mana setiap pewartaan yang dibuat di bawah akta ini memperuntukkan bahawa Jabatan Warisan sendiri yang perlu menjaga, perlu membaik pulih dan perlu segala-galanya. Tapi sebenarnya dari segi interpretasi dia, kadang tu silap dalam akta tu sendiri di bawah Section 42 dan Section 40-42 dia memberikan tanggungjawab kepada pemunya atau kerajaan negeri untuk sama-sama turut sama memelihara atau menjaga bangunan itu agar dia kekal. Ya. So dalam hal yang selain daripada itu, kita juga dalam akta juga telah memperuntukkan beberapa kriteria lah. Ya. Kriteria sebelum dia boleh diwakilkan lah. Sedikit mengenai proses tu. Untuk sesuatu butiran warisan termasuk warisan seni Bane dipertimbangkan bagi diangkat sebagai warisan di bawah Akta 645, ia perlu menepati sekurang-kurangnya salah satu dari 9 kriteria lah. 9 kriteria di bawah Seksyen 67, iaitu pensiaran warisan kebangsaan. Setiap butiran yang dicadangkan untuk diwakilkan di bawah Akta 645 akan melalui satu proses tapisan yang amat ketat. Sehingga ini kita mempunyai 13 jawatan kuasa pakar warisan yang telah ditubuhkan bagi membuat pengesyuaran kepada Pesuruhjaya untuk mengangkat sesuatu butiran yang mempunyai signifikan warisan sebagai warisan atau warisan kebangsaan. Ini adalah dua kategori lah yang ada dalam instrumen kita, Akta Warisan. Sebab dalam peringkat warisan hanya Pesuruhjaya boleh isytiharkan bangunan warisan, tapi bila kita ingin angkat sehingga ke peringkat warisan kebangsaan di bawah akta itu, ia memerlukan pengisytiharan oleh menteri yang bertanggungjawab lah. Ya. Salah satu daripada, kalau kita tengok jawatan kuasa seperti yang dalam layar tu, ada satu jawatan kuasa pakar warisan seni Bane dan landscape. Ini adalah salah satu jawatan kuasa yang dilantik khas bagi mendengarlah atau cadangan-cadangan yang dikemukakan lah. Dan jawatan kuasa ini akan berbahas bincang signifikansi dan integriti sesuatu butiran sebelum ia diputuskan untuk disyorkan. Ya. Selain daripada itu, ya, kita boleh lihat juga di bawah Akta 645, Jabatan Warisan juga bertanggungjawab bagi menetapkan sebarang pembangunan atau proses-proses pembangunan tapak-tapak warisan itu perlu melalui satu proses kebenaran merancang, iaitu di bawah Seksyen 40 Akta ni, di mana setiap pembangunan yang perlu dibuat, perlu dia membuat permohonan. Ini permohonan pembangunan di tapak-tapak warisan perlu membuat permohonan terlebih dulu kepada jabatan, dan dia akan dipertimbangkanlah di bawah jawatan kuasa pakar, dan seterusnya kita akan melihat kesesuaian pembangunan yang akan dilaksanakan. Ya. Selain daripada itu, kita juga melaksanakan pemantauan penguatkuasaan tentang tapak-tapak bangunan atau yang telah diwakilkan. Biasanya kita akan melakukan dalam tempoh sebanyak 2 kali dalam tempoh setahun, melawat tapak-tapak tu dan memberi satu khidmat nasihat atau penegasan apakah tindakan selanjutnya lah dari segi kita untuk meneruskan proses memelihara dan perlindungan kepada jabatan. So biasanya dalam hal ni kadang-kadang terdapat banyak isu yang berkaitan dengan keengganan untuk pemilik atau pemunya tapak untuk mengemukakan lah, disebabkan kami sering berdepan dengan isu rungutan bagi pemilik-pemilik atau pemunya-pemunya ini yang ingin membuat pembangunan di sekitar tapak dia atau bangunan dia tentang kesukaran. Sebenarnya kita bagi pihak jabatan lah, bagi di bawah akta ini, kita tidak pernah menghalang sebarang cadangan pembangunan atau kemajuan. Namun, apa yang kita perlukan ialah kita cuba mengekalkan integriti atau ketulinan atau keaslian tapak itu dari segi sejarah dan estetikanya sekali. Itu adalah yang amat penting dalam prinsip kita memelihara dan memelihara bangunan tu. So, biasanya apa yang kita perlu, kita melihat beberapa aspek dalam penyesuaian gunaan atau adaptive reuse dalam mana bangunan yang telah itu. Kita tidak terlalu rigid dalam hal ni. Saya dapati bahawa perkara-perkara ini kita boleh lihat dalam banyak contoh-contoh di luar negara sendiri. Contoh di Perancis dan Britain. Terdapat pembangunan yang diseimbangkan antara keperluan pembangunan semasa, keperluan semasa dengan pembangunan warisan yang dia boleh dikatakan sebagai balance development untuk yang menyeimbangkan antara dua aspek itu, warisan dan pembangunan dan kegunaannya, ya. Dan ini perlu supaya warisan atau bangunan warisan itu tidak tenggelam atau tidak musnah seterusnya. Kebanyakan cadangan-cadangan yang dikemukakan itu walaupun apa yang penting pada sini ialah ia melibatkan satu kos yang agak besar, dan dalam pada itu kita Jabatan Warisan juga telah memperuntukkan beberapa dari segi aspek seni bina ni, memperuntukkan satu garis panduan, ya. Kita telah membentuk satu garis panduan bagi memberi panduan kepada semua pemilik atau pemunya ataupun pihak berkuasa negeri untuk dalam proses pembangunan harus merujuk kepada garis panduan yang disediakan. Ini kadang-kadang kita antara biasa memang banyaklah kita menerima rungutan-rungutan tentang perkara. Tapi perkara itu memang kita dah ada, kita dah standardiskan garis panduan pemulihan bangunan, ya. Dan kita membuat kajian tu dari semasa-semasa dan kita cuba harmonikan dengan keperluan pembangunan dan juga keperluan warisan. Dan jangan kita mengatakan bahawa atap ini menghalang sebarang cadangan pembangunan, ya. Selain daripada itu, dalam usaha juga melindungi seni bina dan mengikut atap ini, kita juga telah menubuhkan atau membentuk mendaftar konservator yang berdaftar, yang mempunyai latihan yang secukupnya lah, ya. Setakat ini, ya, kita mempunyai seramai 44 orang lah. 44 orang konservator yang berdaftar di seluruh negara lah, yang mempunyai tauliah dalam pendekatan konservasi bangunan-bangunan warisan. Dan ini kita tidak setakat inilah, kalau kita lihat sebanyak 266 projek konservasi telah dilaksanakan melalui konservator yang berdaftar dengan kita. So ini adalah salah satu dari peraturan-peraturan atau ketetapan yang kita usahakan melalui akta yang ada, ya.
Kita tinggal lagi beberapa minit untuk sesi.
Okey, saya cuba sum up lagi dengan apa tu. Jika kalau kita tengok di sini bahawa dalam proses apa yang telah dibagi kepada saya, bahawa atap warisan yang kita telah bangunkan ini, walaupun orang kata masih muda usianya, kita memerlukan satu kerjasama dari semua pihak, bahawa untuk memahami kepentingan pemulihan warisan itu perlu dalam kita menetapkan hala tuju jabatan dan juga melalui dasar kita yang baru kita lancarkan dakan baru-baru ni, kita dalam dakan itu sendiri memperuntukkan bahawa salah satu perkara yang ditekankan di sini dalam dasar kebudayaan kita ialah pemeliharaan. Dalam strategi 7 ialah pemeliharaan warisan budaya. Ini menunjukkan berapa seriusnya kerajaan untuk sama-sama dan menyeru kepada semua yang di luar untuk sama-sama kita menyelamat atau melihara warisan kita agar tidak hilang. Dan ini boleh memberikan suatu apa orang kata perkara-perkara yang dari segi pembentukan jati diri dan juga identiti negara itu supaya tidak musnah. Bila kalau dah habis warisan ni, kita anggap bahawa bila yang patah tak akan tumbuh lagi. So dalam hal itu dalam bawah strategi ini kerajaan juga memberi satu insentif potongan cukai penajaman aktiviti kesenian, kebudayaan dan warisan. Ini termasuklah bagi mana-mana NGO atau badan-badan korporat atau mana-mana syarikat swasta yang ingin turut sama melestarikan warisan kita, akan diberi satu insentif potongan cukai daripada penajaan yang telah dibuat, ya. Dan saya rasa perkara yang penting pada sini, saya melihat di sini, saya ingin sambung di sini bahawa sebelum kewujudan Akta Warisan 2005, Akta 645 ini, belum ada satu betul-betul yang komprehensif tentang pemeliharaan warisan seni bina. Cuma selepas wujudnya Akta Warisan Negara 2005, Akta 645 ini, barulah kita boleh lihat bahawa terdapatnya kesungguhan kerajaan dan bersama-sama untuk melindungi warisan negara hingga membentuk suatu peruntukan khusus dalam menyelenggara dan memelihara warisan yang sedia ada. Saya rasa untuk sebagai penutupnya, sekali lagi saya ingin mengucapkan terima kasihlah kepada pihak UiTM, walaupun dalam keadaan orang kata kesuntukan masa untuk saya dan kesibukan, tapi saya cubalah jika ada apa-apa persoalan yang ingin dikemukakan, saya akan sedia menjawab dan kita akan lihatlah bahawa, dan kita juga melihatlah kerjasama dari pihak UTM sendiri. Saya tahu UTM ada kalam dia sendiri, dan mohon bahawa kerja menyelamat dan memelihara atau melindungi warisan ini bukan semata-mata tugas Jabatan Warisan, tapi tugas kita bersama. Itulah kita menggunakan tagline, ya, kenali, sayangi dan lestari warisan kita sebagai satu usaha untuk kita menarik semua pihak bersama-sama untuk kita menyelamatkan warisan kita dan mengekalkan identiti kita supaya kita boleh berbangga hingga ke peringkat dunia seperti mana yang kita telah laksanakan hingga peringkat antarabangsa itu. So, saya ucapkan terima kasih sekali lagi kepada pihak penganjur kerana mengundang saya, dan saya minta maaf dalam hal perkara ini sebab saya terpaksa berbicara atau mempersembahkan dalam bahasa Malaysia. So, saya rasa saya lebih sesuai untuk berbicara. So, saya ucapkan terima kasih sekali lagi. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Saya serahkan kembali kepada moderator.
Terima kasih Yang Berusaha Encik Muhammad Azmi, Muhammad Yusof. A brief introduction of the National Heritage Act. To those who are new to this, I hope you have got the gist of the National Heritage Act, which was introduced in 2005. I've been working with Jabatan Warisan Negara, National Heritage Department, for a very long years. I know many friends there. I can testify that they have been working tirelessly, and they have working to their best ability to ensure the safeguarding of the heritage. However, the development and modernization that we are facing currently sometimes moving so fast and not sympathetic to the heritage. So that probably points that we probably need to discuss, whether today or probably in the future. For your information, this webinar is currently attended by, we almost touching 200 participants. A record-breaking webinar, and I believe also attended by some of our friends overseas. We have extended the invitation to Sasi Creative School of Architecture India, SRM Institute of Technology India, Vellore Institute of Technology India, De Montfort University United Kingdom, University of Sheffield United Kingdom, Shibora Institute of Technology Japan, Universidad de Alicante Spain, Universitas Tanjung Pura Indonesia, and Universitas Indonesia. So if you are here, those who are non-Malaysian, if you are here, we welcome you to the webinars series. We hope this is not the first and the last. Is going to be many more to come. So for the next presenter, I will pass the baton to Dr. Shahira to introduce the next speaker.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Syed. Okay, without further ado, let me just introduce a little bit of our second keynote speakers, which is Honorable President ICOMOS Malaysia, Mr. Architect Tiong Kian Boon, who actually has been known. He is actually born and brought up in Malacca. He received various of professional recognitions and also professional education training as an architect in England. And then he has worked with the government of Malaysia and as a mid-level position in a Dan Fitch home Malaysian multinational company, which now has presence in European and Asia Pacific region. Architect Tiong KB has spent the last 30 years practicing architect profession in a field of historic city of Malacca and also interest in heritage conservation. So without further ado, let's listen to presentation of the President of ICOMOS Malaysia. Over to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Shaibaria. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. And I want to express a big thank you to UTM, especially to Professor Alice for inviting ICOMOS Malaysia to share in this session. When I got this title, I said, wow, it's a long title, Heritage Methods and Approaches in Promoting Architectural Sustainability from a Social, Economic and Environmental Perspective. I think you can have a two semester course on this. But I'm going to go very fast already. Next slide, please. But when you talk about heritage methods and approaches, I think no one can top ICOMOS on this matter. ICOMOS has, since its foundation, has built up a large body of knowledge, and especially that body of knowledge which ICOMOS refer to as doctrines. And these doctrines or doctrinal texts, and these doctrinal texts exist on various levels of the organization, from the very top, which the grandfather of which we all know as the Venice Charter of 1964, which was adopted by ICOMOS in 1965 as the very first charter it has adopted since its foundation. In fact, 1965 is the year of the foundation of ICOMOS. ICOMOS was actually mooted at the very Congress of Architects and Technicians of Historic Monuments in Venice in 1964. And in the organization that moved the founding of ICOMOS was actually UNESCO itself, supported of course by ICOM, which is the International Council on Monument on Museums. That is our previous speaker will be very familiar with, and also ICROM, which was founded in 1959, I think, 1959. But this doctrinal text, as ICOMOS refer to it, there are charters at the ICOMOS level, at the very ICOMOS level. As I mentioned earlier, that the grandfather or the grandmother or the mother of it all is the Venice Charter in 1964. And you will see that subsequent all doctrinal texts will always refer to the Venice Charter, referencing the Venice Charter. But the next one, which I felt is more significant for Asia Pacific, especially in Asia Pacific, is the Nara document authenticity. As the name suggested, it was first mooted at a conference in Nara, and we will come to that a bit later. And the one that is most practical to all of us, and in fact that was the first one that I cut my teeth on, is the Bura Charter, which the Australian it is actually a national charter, not an international charter. It's a charter that is adopted by Australia ICOMOS in 1981, and since then have been updated, the latest being in 2013. And the last one, which I thought was significant enough to bring up in the context of this subject today, was the Xi'an Declaration on Conservation of Setting of Heritage Site Structures, Sites and Areas, and that was in 2005. Next slide, please. Now, the historical context of the Venice Charter. The Venice Charter was actually harked back to the Athens Charter of 1931. Yes, that's before the war. The United Nations wasn't formed then. It was the League of Nations, in fact. And it was actually and the three organizations that actually discussed that was ICOM, UNESCO, and ICROM. ICOMOS was just a spark, just a twinkle in UNESCO's eye, and it was discussed at the Venice Congress of 1964. That will be the second Congress of Architects and Technicians of Historic Monuments. Now, the Venice Charter, I wouldn't go through all the items that is mentioned that's mentioned in my slide there, but the Venice Charter basically discuss authenticity and originality, and it was so biased to the Western way of thinking of construction and technology. And the very reason why I put the Potala Palace as an illustration in this slide is because this is I think the only other culture within Asia Pacific that builds in stone and more permanent structures are in the Indian subcontinent, as well as in Tibet itself. And they are so strict that it defines authenticity with its emphasis on originality. It actually was reflected in the early World Heritage Convention's operational guidelines, and that, to quote, cultural properties must meet the test of authenticity in design, materials, workmanship, and setting. It is no reconstruction is permissible in the Venice Charter. Only reassembling of the original components are allowed. That is as strict as it will go. But let's go on to the next slide, and we'll have a quick discussion. I intend to keep to my time. The quick discussion on the Nara Charter. As I mentioned earlier on, the Venice Charter is always grandfather. Every time they discuss something, it must always be referenced back to the Venice Charter. for all its weaknesses, there's nothing wrong, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with the Venice Charter. But there is one conflicting thing, is that the Venice Charter was, except for a few North African countries and some American nations, the Venice Charter was basically a document that was drafted by a group of Europeans. So it's very Eurocentric, reflecting very much the European traditions of construction, the European ideas of heritage and historic sites and monuments. So the Nara Charter basically came about because the East Asians especially wants to clarify authenticity, at the same time recognizing cultural diversity and traditions. Again, it was conceived in the spirit of the Venice Charter. And I think this part here, which there are two places in this slide which I highlighted, and that is the recognition of diversity of cultures and heritage as an irreplaceable source of spiritual and intellectual richness for humanity. And to quote David Lowenthal, I think Dr. Ellis, you will know exactly who is he. He's the grandfather of all heritage studies. He actually invented the studies. So one day, one of you may invent another branch of studies, and we can call you grandmother or grandfather of such a studies, okay? But David Lowenthal, in describing the output of Nara Declaration, says that authenticity is in practice never absolute. It is always only relative. And we must always have that respect, and the respect for diversity of cultures, the diversity of traditions, the diversity of beliefs. And that respect can only come about if we will avoid standardizing and use mechanistic procedures in defining and determining authenticity. I think it is also in the Nara Chart Declaration that it was first in all the doctrinal texts. It was first officially, as it were, put into context that there is a need for multidisciplinary collaboration and consensus, not only within the movement itself, but within the country itself, but also across national boundaries, and have it adopted as a worldwide thing. Now again, I put one of the buildings in the Ise Jun Grand Shrine in Nara, because all these buildings in the Ise Jun Grand Shrine are actually typical of the tradition that we speak about, that the East Asian built we built with materials that are not durable as stone and masonry. But having said that, the tradition of craftsmanship and artisanship is continually being developed and preserved for all eternities by the very methods that kept these buildings in pristine condition, even through some of them, as this one was supposed to be dated back to 2000, but written records actually show that there is a continual renewal, a rebuilding of individual buildings every 20-year cycle. Next slide, please. The Nara Declaration, next slide, please. No, sorry, correct. The Bura Charter of 1979 by Australian ICOMOS. I think this is one of the most practical tool that we have insofar as methods and approaches are concerned, because it actually goes down to the nitty-gritty. And if you follow the core of this charter is in Article 6. And Article 6 basically says understanding the place, assess cultural significance, assess all values using relevant criteria, and develop a statement of significance. He also asks you to identify all factors and issues. You then come to developing a policy and then prepare a management plan before coming up to the implementation itself, which is implementing the management plan, which involves, if necessary, conservation and restoration, and then finally monitoring the results and reviewing the plan constantly. We have to remember and remind ourselves constantly that conservation is not a one-off activity. It is an activity that's very much ongoing. And if you go back to the Nara Charter, if I can just find my Nara Charter, here, the Nara Charter, it talks about in paragraph 6, it talks about cultural heritage diversity exists in time and space and demands respect for other cultures and all other aspects of belief and system. I think that itself indicates that time is a factor, and over time, the idea of progressive authenticity comes in, and the authenticity actually evolve and develop to meet the changes of time and culture. And he also says that where cultural values appear to be in conflict, respect for cultural diversity demands acknowledgement of the legitimacy of the cultural values of all parties. And this is, I think, a very important aspect. Even though we disagree with the value attached to a particular culture or cultural heritage, an expression of cultural heritage, there must be respect for that as well. The next slide, please. The Badan Charter. Can you just go on to the Xi'an Declaration? The Xi'an Declaration, again, it was conceived in the spirit of the Venice Charter, the Nara Declaration, the Hoi An Declaration, and the Seoul Declaration of Tourism in Asia's historic towns and areas. That is the last one, the last scientific symposium that was held in Korea. And I think for us living in the Asia Pacific area, and interestingly enough, the Deputy President of ICOMOS Malaysia yesterday in an engagement with one of the PBT from Sabah actually advised the yang dipertua, timbalan yang dipertua, or yang timbalan yang timbalan yang dipertua of that PBT, that do not put tourism first. Put historic buildings first, and look after the values, the significance of that historic building. Because if you put tourism first, it's like putting the horse, putting the cart before the horse. So I think that was a very good advice, and he's basically a tourism man. So his area of specialty is actually cultural tourism, and he comes and tells us that, hey, forget about my profession, look after cultural tourism, look after the cultural aspects first. And I think the lesson to be learned here is actually made very clear in a particular project that was carried out in Kelantan, and for which there was a little group discussion that was held about 2 weeks ago in Kota Baru itself. I will not mention names, but that's it. That's basically the Nara Declaration. Basically confirmed that there was a layering of history onto a cultural property, and then this becomes an authentic attributes of the property itself. The Xi'an Declaration actually tries to look on a more global aspect, and went on to look at it from a setting condition, real understanding that the building does not live in isolation on its own. And if you read very much into the Venice Charter, you will see that the Venice Charter actually recognized that too. when he says that, now let me try, here it is. The Venice Charter in Article 1 in the definition section says that the concept of a historic monument embraces not only the single architectural work, and this is something that we all talk about when we talk about historic buildings or we talk about heritage buildings. I think JWN would like to actually, at some stage, like to make us stop referring to historic buildings as heritage buildings, because heritage buildings actually needs a higher and more distinctive affirmation than just referring to it as heritage buildings. That I think have to be left to another day for our debate and discussion. But let's see the Article 1 of the Venice Charter. It says the concept of a historic monument embraces not only the single architectural work, but also the urban and rural setting in which it is found, the evidence of a particular civilization, a significant development, or a historic event. There are some buildings that are architecturally insignificant, but because of what happened there. For example, the Baling room in the room where Tunku Abdul Rahman meet Jinping is nothing more than a little hut. But it's a school, I think, if I remember correctly. But it is a culturally important monument, albeit very architecturally very insignificant, because of the event that is held there. We went on ICOMOS organized a study trip to Kuala Kubu Baru, Fraser's Hill, and Rasa in the last few months just after the lockdown was lifted, and we had the pleasure of being hosted by Dato' Dahlia, who was a former Plan Malaysia Director General, at the former studio, office, residence, so-called temporary residence of Rahman Rashid. It's a typical upper floor of a shop house built in the British English era, but it is culturally significant because of who was there. We went to my family visited Barcelona in 2016, I think, and I was shocked to think that the whole tourism to find out that the whole tourism industry of Barcelona is built around one man. And that's Gaudi. Is that Gaudi? Yeah, that's Gaudi. That's Gaudi. It's built around one person, and he died, and his body died. His body was not identified for a few days. I think it's just over a week. He died being knocked down by a bus, and no one identified his body for over a week. And that man was the source of an entire tourism industry in Barcelona, and it's not a small industry too. And Rahman Rashid has become like an icon in the little town of Kuala Kubu Baru. And that is the historical, that's the personality and historic events that also marked out significance in our national heritage. Eventually, if we go through the issue. Now I took the if you go back to the previous slide, the Bura Charter, you know why the Sydney Opera House is there, because it is in Australia. The next one, the Xi'an Declaration. I use the Malacca River because it was too troublesome to find a slide of Xi'an, although I visited Xi'an on 2 occasions. Okay, the next slide, please. Architectural sustainability. What does that mean? Next slide, please. I think as sustainability has become a very significant buzzword in this day, is on the lips of everybody and anybody think of. And one of the first thing that comes to your mind when you talk about a sustainable building is this monstrosity that is on this slide here. A building full of plants growing from top to bottom, completely unnatural, but it's supposed to be green because it has a lot. It's supposed to be sustainable because you have a lot of plants. I think earlier our moderator, Professor Syed Iskandar, have mentioned about addressing energy as one of the issues. I think it's just energy is just one of the issues when you talk about architectural sustainability. Architecture as the discipline that created the edifices that impacted society, economies, environment over a significantly long time frame would naturally come under scrutiny as far when you talk about trying to develop a more sustainable future for the earth. And if you take it one step further, the car is probably a wrong mode of transportation, because car uses heck of a lot of energy in a very inefficient way. Even electric car. A lot of us talk about electricity being the savior and being the end of the road. The idea is to use less and less electricity. The idea is to use less and less energy. And electricity itself is actually a not very efficient form of energy as well. You have to convert fossil fuel, unless of course it's generated by renewable energy. So if we look at that, and then the personal transportation also. I think this is a fine thing for me to talk. Owning 3 cars between 2 of us, but it is when you talk about sustainability, you have to look at it in a whole ecosystem. Unless the government comes up, the public authorities come up with a plan to maximize public transport, trains, buses, what have you. There will be no end of building roads and using up resources to move people from left to right. Unless we think about where we live and work, instead of staying in the countryside and driving all the way 40, 50 kilometers, 60 kilometers, taking the train 60 kilometers into town just to perform your job, we will not be able to address this sustainability issue adequately. Like it or not, sustainability has got to do with a lifestyle as well as a philosophical approach in terms of technology and methods. Life cycle considerations of materials and components need to be factored in, because eventually these materials that you use in a building needs to be replaced, and we have to talk about whether we can recycle these materials. The use of renewable energy, if it costs more energy to make the things that you need, or like for example renewable energy, a lot of it depends on some rare metals coatings. Solar PV panels actually need some rare earth coatings, and rare earth coating are extremely water intensive process. The processing of rare earth minerals are extremely water intensive, and these are things that we all needs to be calculated. The aim of a sustainable building, the aim of architectural sustainability has to be the tendency to use materials, processes that have little impact on the environment. Now we talked about looking at energy. looking at energy efficiency and moderation in building materials when we talk about architectural sustainability, and ecological issues in the setting and design of buildings. Now, if you really look at the end of the day, what are the most sustainable practices and principles? What are the principles and practices in sustainable architecture? In developing a sustainable architecture, where are its roots? And you will find that by most standards, it came from pre-industrial construction, traditional pre-industrial construction. The entire pre-industrial building culture is determined by a lack of resources that you can access too easily. Okay, and because you are restricted by the lack of resources that you can access easily, you are forced to make very, very hard choices as to the materials you build in, and most of it are low energy. Low energy not only in terms of preparing the materials for construction, but low energy also in the fact that they are renewable and those less durable materials like wood are actually there is actually a plan for replacement, as you will see later on when we talk about the temples of Japan as a case study. So stones, if you go to Malacca, if you come to Malacca, okay, you go to Malacca, but for my perspective, if you come to Malacca, a lot of houses around Jalan Laksamana, the road that leads to what we call the Red Square, the civic center of Malacca, and the road the row of houses, shop houses that is along the little lane that leads from Jalan Bunga Raya, called Java Lane. If you take away the plaster, what you see as the masonry that the buildings are built on is not brickwork. It's actually laterite stone. They were all built after the great vandal called William Farquhar blew up the fort of Malacca. You know, so there's always this consideration: where do I get my material from? Nothing is wasted in the old days. And when we come to the case study that I'm going to bring up afterwards, you will see that consideration being used at all times. And this is something I think if you are talking about methods, you have to do that. Okay, Ise Junku Grand Shrine Nara. This is the moving in ceremony. The moving in ceremony for the rebuilding of the shrine. Now, many of the temples, there's one that is rebuilt every 300 years. There's one I know that was rebuilt every 70 years. The one that was rebuilt every 70 years, I just can't for the life of me remember the name of it. Was actually rebuilt completely. It was a single building on the site. It was rebuilt completely every 70 years on a site next to the original building, or what was the original building. And the timber that was sourced for that building is sourced from a growth of trees that was specially planted to build that building, to rebuild that building. The technology involved, the artisanship and the craftsmanship involved is part of, as it were, it's usually a Shinto shrine, and it's part of the worship as well as a cultural process. And that traditions keep going on and on and on. You can actually identify the way it was put together by the exmarks, by the craftsmen's incisions on the timber components. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is what the Ise Jinku Grand Shrine in Nara. It's not just one building. It's an ensemble of many buildings. And the slide on the right is actually built in the tradition of a grain storage building. And that was the one that is usually rebuilt every 20 years. Next slide, please. What do we do when we rebuild? This is a pavilion on the grounds of the Ise Jinggu Grand Shrine. The first thing, as UTM is well noted for, is measured drawing. Very detailed measured drawing. And this is a measured drawing. Those are the documents, the very method, the start of the methodology of approaching a construction project. And it is said today that we don't look back on old buildings when we for clues and clues as to how we can build is in a sustainable manner. Next slide, please. These are the structural components. What you see as solid columns are not actually solid. They're actually made from small components of sections of timber. And this is how exactly what it was before they raised it up and put up all the buildings on the site. And one thing good about it, it means that you do not need to cut down very old growth trees, which means you actually preserve the old growth trees, and you can actually use younger trees which are easily replaceable. And when they pull down the old buildings, any timber that still can be used will be stored for the next building cycle. It's only 20 years down the road anyway. And I know that good timber, properly seasoned and prepared, can last 300-400 years without any problem. Okay, so you're talking about that. Okay, the next case study I want to bring up here is a job that we did as an office. It's an old warehouse by the Malacca River. The slide on the right is when we were approached to do this warehouse. I didn't particularly want to show all the things but one of the first things we did was to do a measured drawing. And because over the last 200 years, this building was the original roof was not even tile roof. This tile roof is actually the typical local made Hmong and Nan tiles, which you all sometimes call it Chinese tiles, but actually it's not Chinese tiles. It's not even from China. The inspiration of this actually came from the Mediterranean area. The dilapidation studies, which we did a measured drawing as it were, and then we did a reconstructed measured drawing, looking at the clues that we can find to see what is the final result that we hope to achieve. There are some requirements that was imposed on us, but there are also some, but those requirements sometimes conflict with what we think the material that was used is capable of. In this day and age, you go to KL, go to Malacca, you go to Penang, I don't know where else. You'll see they strip all the plaster work and expose all the brickwork. As beautiful as it is, those brickworks are not meant to be exposed. They are meant to be protected behind plaster work. And because the brickwork itself are the structure of the buildings, the eventual weathering process will actually reduce the structural integrity of the building. So when we come to this one, as usual, the client says we want to have exposed brickwork if possible on the outside. We say at the bottom, no, you have to protect it. On the top, we'll do it, but we use recycled bricks. In addition, this is where Venice Charter will say, no, you're a naughty boy. But as far as we are concerned, the other part of the Venice Charter says that it must be apt for use. So we took a bit of license and we actually put in a half brick wall house next to the actual original load bearing mold, and then redo the plaster. So that brick wall is like a sacrificial anode that is meant to be sacrificed to the weather if need to. This was finished, I think, about 15 years ago. Next slide, please. Okay. The landing walls was no. Go back to the immediately after it was opened, there was a nice little cafe that was run out there. Now let me tell you what was the process we did, process we undergo when we were doing this building. We identify the on-site recyclable components, and then we repurpose building components from other sites in Malacca, which the developer have gathered over the years. The aircon units were not supposed to be there. Those were additional aircon units. The aircon units were supposed to be on the courtyard, just between the two gables. This building actually banks up to another building at the back, and therefore there was an air well and an open first floor slab that acts as real ventilation to this building. If you want to know where this building is, it's next to the Hard Rock Cafe in Malacca. Okay, so we identify what we can recycle from the site and what we can repurpose from other sites to use on as far as the imported and new materials are concerned. We use some rebars, some aggregate and cement for a replacement concrete first floor terrace in the airwell, because the old slab which they used was actually using brickwork and lime plaster, using bulldog mesh as the reinforcement, and that's not very durable. We thought we will again use some license and actually reconstruct that in proper concrete floor. Anyway, the engineer won't think of any other way but that. Then the structural timbers were replaced, and we used balau in this case. The old structural timbers were actually, the longer members actually recycle ship masts. You know, the tiang in the middle of a sailing ship, they actually recycle ship masts. And a lot of them are not even round and not even square in section, they're round, but they're very long. They're very long. It's just nice to span that kind of span that you're talking about. And even the purlins and all, a lot of it are recycled shipping material, ship construction material, which I find is not unusual. I was involved in a few of I don't know where they call it, restoration or just repair works in some of the significant Baba houses, which have a much larger span. And invariably, all the rafters in those buildings are recycled ship timbers, because to bring freshly hewn timbers of that length, 28 feet, 30 feet, is actually quite expensive. And in those days, you don't have it probably maybe in some countries where there are big rivers, they'll float it down the river, but definitely not for Malacca River. Okay, so the structural timbers were replaced because a lot of timbers are actually gone, as you can see from the original roof, and we used lime which was slaked on site, and that lime which was slaked on site. Okay, I'm finishing now. This is the last slide. As I say, I will finish on time. Okay, with that, I think you've seen my comments on in the slides. I leave it to you all to go and look at it later if you want to. This is not meant to be a talk that gives you all the details. You can look at the various charters, and you can go by yourself to the resources of ICOMOS website and download these things. But if you are a member, you can download everything. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, KB. After listening to Yang Barusan Encik Muhammad Azmi, who have given us the national perspective on conservation, from taking on from the Natural Heritage Act, we then have And then architect Tiong AB has presented to us the international perspective from various culture on heritage and conservation. So thank you very much, Architect KB. I remember during my master's studies on conservation, when I learned construction in architecture days, architecture student days, a mortar is supposed to tie bricks together. But when I learned conservation, they said the mortar is meant to separate the bricks apart. So different way of looking at things. Okay, Shaira, we're going to have a question and answer, right?
Yes,
Question
we
number
do.
one.
Okay, we have questions for Encik Azmi. Okay, Jabatan Warisan had act and policy to control heritage development in Malaysia, but why it is in Malaysia nowadays there are a lot of uncontrollable development. For instance, many heritage buildings had been misused and not developed, not according to the context. So yeah.
Soalan untuk Encik
Encik
Azmi,
Azmi.
right?
Yeah, betul. Encik Azmi ada
Mungkin tak ada.
yeah. Okay, kita simpan dulu. Okay, sebenarnya ada satu soalan lagi. Okay, if any audience have any questions, you can unmute your audio and then can ask the questions. Yeah, if anyone has any questions or drop any questions, because we have one questions to Encik Azmi and we have another questions. But they just mentioned that my question goes to AR Tiong Boon, but there's no questions. Or we like to wait for, or we just
Okay, let me throw one question. This is of course for KB. You know that the only constant thing is change.
Yes.
If we don't
And
change,
Texas, by the way, and Texas.
yeah, if we don't change, we'll probably not survive.
Mm.
Yeah. The thing is that change is also influenced by the perception of the society. How the society wish to change depend on their mindset. All the tradition and the heritage that we have got are basically close to the hearts of the young, the older generations, and the millennial who were born during the internet days, who probably have less exposure to heritage, they probably have detached themselves. They are not passionate about the heritage. So I wonder in the future, when they become leaders, would they be sympathetic to the preservation and safeguarding of the heritage? Can you respond to that?
Oh, I wouldn't be as pessimistic as you, Doctor. I believe a lot of it all depends on how we teach them. That's why ICOMOS believe in education, if possible, as young as we can get them. One of the early activities, and one of those activities that poor church mouse organization like us can afford, is a children's art competition, and we felt that by bringing the attention of children to heritage in an activity that they all can relate in, they would understand. They will slowly have an appreciation for heritage. I think as a child, I grew up in Malacca, as I said earlier. As a child, my school is practically next door to St. Paul's Hill, and all the nice buildings around there. What is now the STEM Museum used to be the Malacca Museum, and there were some very nice artifacts there which never changed in the 15 years that for 15 years I know that I visited it until I came back from the UK. And I used to play on the hill as well in the temples, in the church, in the old abandoned church. And there was an historian up there who was supposed to be the custodian and who take guided tours of tourists that explain all the epitaphs on all the tombstones. And I think listening to him talk about the people that was described on the tombstones and the activities that goes around in the church helps me to understand and appreciate and also the construction of the church, of course, help me to understand and appreciate the heritage the buildings that we were left behind by the old colonial masters. By the way, that gentleman was an active member of the Malacca Historical Society, and he speaks Malay in a very funny accent, but he's a Malay. But he speaks Malay more like Englishman. I think at the end of the day is how we bring up our children. I believe that. I like to think that my children share my passion for heritage, although none of them are architects, and one is remotely, only one is remotely related to arts. But my younger son and his wife are both very keen on literature, and actually see cultural heritage from a literature point of view. I think this is something we talk about cultural heritage. The expression is both tangible and intangible, and we cannot take one from the other. That's why I mentioned earlier about Rahman Rashid and Gaudi. I think that's our take. We live in an increasingly complex world, and I think East Asian communities and cultures actually appreciate change more than anything. And not only do we appreciate change, we don't try and fight it, we embrace it. And that's why the traditions of rebuilding temples, the tradition of moving houses and timber kampong houses from one side to another side, and actually have this craftsmanship being explored and repeated and retrained. I think is quite I wouldn't be as pessimistic as you lah, Doctor.
Okay, thank you, KB. I'm not sure whether Encik Muhammad Azmi is still around. I have this question for Encik Muhammad Azmi. If not around, probably members from the Jabatan Warisan Negara can respond. Saya boleh nampak Encik Johar Kadis ada, Encik Muhammad Izzuan ada, mungkin boleh respon. Soalannya begini, the question goes like this. Akta Warisan was introduced, National Heritage Act was introduced in 2005. Now that we are in 2021 and soon 2022, so it's going to be about 16 years old act. Adakah Jabatan Warisan Negara sedang dalam proses meminda penggubalan Akta Warisan? Sekiranya ada, bahagian apakah yang hendak dimasukkan, nak dipinda? Architect Tiong, KB, you wait there. You probably have to respond to this question as well. I will wait a few minutes.
What question is that?
The question is about the national heritage is 16, 17 years old.
16 years.
Yeah, 16 years. So probably people start thinking of amending the act, making it stronger, better, to help facilitate the safeguarding of the heritage during this 21st century. Jabatan Warisan probably have some ideas on this.
I don't think I think the National Heritage Act is as good as it can be. The deviousness of man is to try and circumscribe it. I you see the acts of parliament, the laws that parliament enacted, they keep amending it. People keep finding loopholes around it. I think if we go back to the first principle, one of the things I like about ICOMOS approach is whenever they talk about new ideas and things like that, they always reference back to the grandfather of it all, which is the Venice Charter. And they look at it in the context of Venice Charter. Instead of trying to reinvent the wheel, or instead of trying to replace the wheel, they look at it, how can we meet the criteria that was there and that was required of us, and understand exactly what are the scope that is possible within the confines of the act. Rather than amend it and then you come up with another set of problems and then you amend it, there's no end to it. We are really so short-handed in terms of enforcement and monitoring. I like to see more effort go into monitoring and education. And whenever we find enforcement issues, I think education should come side by side with it. You see all the subsequent declarations and charters coming from ICOMOS and all the scientific symposiums that they had have never actually tried to replace the Venice Charter. They try to expand it, they try to explore the scope of it, but never replace it. And the Venice Charter harked back to another earlier charter from 1931, and that is the Athens Charter, as I mentioned earlier in my talk. And there's no such thing as trying to amend it. It's always trying to improve on it. But improvement on it, that law is a dead thing. It's depend on the administration, how the administration will like to put it alive and interpret it in a way that everybody can accept, and also in a way that will meet the needs of the conservation for want of a better word, industry.
Okay, any other questions from the audience? Arigato gozaimasu, konnichiwa. I notice participants from Japan also in the list. We are now reached 198 participants. Any question from the audience?
Okay, we have maybe we can take one more questions, and the
Yep.
question goes to architect Tiong Boon. Despite the timber material can last for centuries, why are the trains in Japan are reconstructed completely every 20 or 70 years?
I think that you miss the other side of the perspective, and that is it's also a cultural and a cultural aspect. There are some in the case of Shinto, the Shinto shrine was rebuilt 20 years. There's one I remember was rebuilt 70 years, and there's one particular one which I took down the name earlier, but I forgot. It started with a H. That was rebuilt actually 300 years once. So it's not actually, but the idea of rebuilding is quite common. But the rebuilding actually emphasizes the reiteration of the skills and traditions involved. So you are maintaining the craftsmanship through all the centuries, and that is in itself, especially when it comes to Shinto. I'm not a Shinto fan, follower, but from what I read is it has something to do with it has something to do with the whole worship process as well. Maybe our Japanese friend can explain to us. It's a very mysterious religion, to say the least. So it's not just the replacement. Like I say, some of the timber components are actually reused, but not immediately. For the 20 years old one, they actually set them aside. But I think the interesting thing is they thought about where the replacement material comes from. They plant it nearby. That's sustainability. The growth become part of the setting for the building, for the structures. That is sustainability. And you don't have the trees to keep the rain off the ground for a few more hours so that they don't rush to the rivers and flood downstream.
Okay, Dr. Shah,
Yeah.
we're having a photo session, right?
Okay. Before we
So thank you. Hello, do I hear something?
Yes, this is Humaira. I would like to have
Oh, Humaira.
Yes.
Yes, please speak louder.
Because I'm a library. Assalamualaikum. I have a question to Dr. Kian.
Can you hear that?
Search and
I can't hear her.
We can't hear you, barely hear.
I will talk louder. I have a question to Dr. Well, I've done my research in clubhouse, large clubhouse, and controls.
Hasri has a question on chat. Maybe Humaria like to type out the question on chat. You might be able to respond to that.
Humaira, we cannot hear you. Your voice seems very further away from us. You probably need to write your question in the chat box and we will respond to that. Is that okay, Humaira?
We have questions from Hazri Abdul Aziz. The questions, good morning everyone. My question goes to KB. You mentioned that you are born and bred in the rich historical city of Malacca. In your view, would someday if Formosa would also be pulled down due to its surrounding development pressure, to which you look now, its surrounding full of development against 30 years ago, which you can still see the streets of Malacca, but now no more. All we could see is buildings at its close proximity. What is your take on that, and would that in a way destroy the historical element in there? Thank you.
Okay. There are three responses I might like to make. The first one is the A Formosa has been destroyed long time ago. Even before William Farquhar blew up the fortress in Malacca, the A Formosa was no longer there. The A Formosa is actually a castle and keep. There was and the fortress of Malacca when Alfonso Albuquerque came was actually a timber fort. Later, but the A Formosa is actually was actually a castle and keep. It was later renamed as the Valha Fortaleza Valha when the outer walls were built in stone, in laterite. What we all always call the A Formosa is actually the Porta Santiago, and it did not even come from the Portuguese era. It's actually built by the Dutch to replace an earlier gate. Okay, will the gate be destroyed? At the rate it's going, even if it's not destroyed, it might collapse on itself. The amount of intervention that was going around in the area was completely as the floor of the gateway itself have actually rose up 1 or 2 feet as I remember it. The surrounding roads similarly with the surrounding roads, and I think the whole context with the whole context of that place has changed. I'm not complaining that it has changed. I'm just making an observation that it has changed. It's not critical that it has changed because it has always changed. Okay, it has always changed. The British built some quarters along at the foothill along the facing the remains of the foundation of the Fortaleza of Malacca, the Fort of Malacca, and that was pulled down by. That was actually later used as a municipal quarters, and then after that it was pulled down. Left empty for a while, and then our previous Chief Minister Tan Sri Rani Tampichik decided to build a replica of the Sultan's palace there. So I won't be surprised it will come down, but I will be very surprised if it is pulled down. The street patterns of Malacca has been there since the Dutch period. It will continue to be there for as long as you think, because of a wonderful land registration system that we have called the Torrens Act, the Torrens system, which gives you unlike in Britain, you have descriptive titles. Here you have distance and bearing. Just an interesting aside. You know that a lot of the houses along Hiran Street on the seaward side, the distance along the party walls are actually not stated. They are stated up to one point, and then beyond that there's another two lines that stretch out to the sea. And then there was a mark down there that says high tide water mark. And that is it. So when they were doing the British, when they were reclaiming the Kota Laksamana area, they actually left a bit of a kind of canal at the back, so that the seawater can continue to come in at high tide before they actually resurvey everything and fix the title. Okay, that's by the by.
Okay, we have another question. Probably this is the last one.
Yes, please.
Okay. To ARKB, this is from Dr. Hairul from UTM. Relating to education, you mentioned about education earlier on. How do we reconcile the appreciation and advocacy of heritage with the current vigorous pull towards STEM? STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Education, STEM education, that calls a technical-driven education.
Okay. I think Article 2 of the Venice Charter, the conservation and restoration of monuments must have recourse to all the sciences and techniques which can contribute to the study and safeguarding of architectural heritage. I think in every man, I think there are two parts of us. On the practical side, we need science and technology to get us going. When I say that the best technique, the best sustainable practice in construction comes from pre-industrial age. I'm not asking you all to go back to the Stone Age. I'm basically saying that look at the principles that were involved. Back in 1964, there's one thing about conservation. A lot of us think that we're anti-development and things like that, but far from it. The authors of the Venice Charter actually thought about that and says, yes, architectural heritage is important to conserve, but we cannot just conserve it as we like from a very arty-farty way. But we have to apply our minds to it. We have to use all the knowledge that we have on it. If science and technology are relevant, then by all means apply science and technology. But it's like asking a person to compare a durian with an apple. It's two different things altogether. STEM has its place in what? And STEM have to address those issues of sustainability. Architecture is issues of sustainability that we have to address. They are two different things altogether. I don't think we can actually say that advocacy of conservation against the advocacy of STEM. I think it's a misnomer that when we are advocating for conservation, heritage conservation, we are actually anti-science and anti-technology and anti-maths. How much one of the things that we discovered in the study of architecture from the medieval period up to the Renaissance is how much mathematics have gone into exploring how you can build lighter and lighter and taller buildings using stones with all the flying buttresses and things like that. There was an involvement of, if nothing else, of engineering, structural engineering involved. This formula.
Okay, we finally received the question from Humaira Fayez. Is from Afghanistan. Majority of heritage buildings are owned by private sector or private owner, and these buildings are more subject to change from modern demand and the desire of owner to have the comfort of modern facilities. Providing these facilities may affect the structure of historic building. As the basic notion of conservation, keeping the authenticity and integrity of building is the essential matter. Her question, how can we have modern facilities and still staying on side of protecting the authenticity and integrity of the heritage building?
Can I see the question again? I lost the question.
You can turn on the chat box.
Yeah, I turn on the chat box. I can't see the question.
The last question.
It's gone from my. It's gone from my.
Really?
It's gone from my chat.
Okay.
Here. Okay, I got it.
Okay.
I got it now. Thank you. I'm not sure how to answer this in the abstract. I can only give you one example of a house which I did some A&A alteration and amendments to. Besides, when the neighbor came and have a look, when the neighbor came to have a look, and the comment that was made is that we actually put in a lot of mod conveniences, and inside the building itself. When the neighbor came to have a look, and in 30 years ago, 600,000 is a lot of money for Melaccans, and he made a comment that that neighbor that came in just spent $1 million plus on doing his house, and he says, I cannot see where you spend your 600 million. I think my client was very happy and says, hey, Tiong, I think we have done it properly. So despite putting in 3 sets of toilets, he can't see where we put it in, although he used the toilets. We do it in such a way that the toilets seems to be naturally there. You must remember all those houses along Hiran Street, especially the older ones. And this particular one is one of those I spoke of having timber mass, sheet mass as structural members. Their toilets is actually straight into the sea, and their bathrooms are actually around a well, and they draw water direct from the well to bathe. And we actually incorporated. We actually took cognizance of all these features of the house, and actually basically, like I say, you do a dilapidation report, you do as-built drawings, and you just come and study the building well and understand what the building is capable of. And one thing about these low intensity, low energy buildings is they are very, very, very adaptable. I think in the very first workshop that Badan Warisan did, and it's the very first conservation workshop in Malaysia. It was held in Malacca, and a comment that was made by one particular advocate of who was also a council member of Badan Warisan, and we were using as a base the old 1960s State Assembly Hall for our little study trips around town. And she says, just looking at the 1960s State Assembly Hall and how deteriorated it was, the dilapidated it was, compared with some of the older buildings. She says it just goes to show that the old building techniques are actually more durable than the new building techniques. So I wouldn't say that you cannot provide facilities, the mod cons, without disturbing disturb the authenticity and integrity of the building. If you go to I had the privilege of visiting Marrakesh on one of the ICOMOS General Assembly. That was 2018 or 2019. And I stayed in one of those, I think they call it Riyadh. It was a traditional courtyard house. And they put in the mod cons inside. And it was done so well, most of them are done so well that you cannot even tell that the Riyadh never really have a ensuite bathrooms. It's all, but to answer this in the abstract, I think it's a bit difficult. We need to see each building on its own merit.
Okay, thank you, Architect KB. Before I pass to Dr. Shahira, I would like to read the response we received from Cik Johar Kadis from Jabatan Warisan Negara in response to the earlier question I asked. He wrote in Malay, buat masa sekarang, JWN Jabatan Warisan Negara sedang menyediakan beberapa peraturan berkaitan akta, terutama berkaitan lesen penggalian dan lesen ekspor sebelum membuat pindaan pada akta. Cadangan untuk pindaan akta sedang diperincikan oleh Jabatan Warisan Negara. There you are. The proposed amendments to the Act is on the way.
Yeah, but those are operational issues rather than fundamental issues of the Act. Is licensing and export and
those are supplementing the Act.
Yeah.
Okay, Dr. Shaira, over to you.
Okay, before we proceed to the next sessions, we on behalf of architecture program would like to take a picture for memories, because we worried that everybody will at the end kind of tired of me. So might as well we take a photo together. So to the audience, we would love that if you can open your video so we can have the pictures taken.
So come on guys, turn on your video. Make sure that your beautiful faces captured. There are several pages for your information. The numbers of participants at this moment is exactly 200. Who's taking the photo?
PC is
Prof,
helping
I'm
us to
taking,
take it.
yes.
Thank you, PC.
Okay.
So we are waiting for the audience to switch on their camera first.
Okay.
Okay, first page. Okay, I
Please
think they're coming.
please make sure that you are in and be counted.
All right, one smile, 1, 2, 3. Okay. So second page. So still loading. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay, try third page. Yeah. Students, do you mind to switch on your camera? Yeah, we have around 200 plus audience.
Now I can see so many of my friends attending. I say hi to Architect Haris,
Okay.
Mariana
1, 2,
Isa,
3.
Azman Hazumi, is it? Okay.
All right.
Asma Adlina.
Yeah, I think we are done with 3 pages. The rest of the
Okay.
audience, maybe they don't have camera, so yeah, it's fine. Okay, over to you.
Thank you,
Prof.
everyone. We will share the images on various platforms, definitely on the Facebook. Over to you, Dr. Sheila.
Okay, so without further ado, we will proceed with the next session, which is the keynote speakers number 3 from Mr. Architect Lim Teck Beng, which is one of the council member of Badan Warisan. So he's a very experienced in a sense of sorry, okay. Is it can be shared? Okay. Teck Beng's architecture work ranges from small into private houses, and then the experience interest in the heritage conservation, which led him to involve in documenting heritage houses in Kuala Terengganu, Ipoh, Taiping, Kuching, and Muar, and joint studios of University of Malaya, National University of Singapore, which he coordinated between 2005 to 2014, and his also interest in photographies, akebana, tea drinking, calligraphy, and also performing arts. So let's hear a presentation from Mr. Architect Lim Teck Beng. Over to you, Mr. Architect. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear
Yes.
me? Okay.
Yes.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's really past noon. Thank you very much to, I would like to express our thanks on behalf of Badan Warisan Malaysia, which is the Heritage Trust of Malaysia. We'd like to thank UTM for organizing this seminar, and we invite us to give Badan Warisan's outlook. So 2 of us are presenting, myself and another colleague of mine, architect Anand, Krishnan later. So we are giving 2 presentations, one on the outlook of Badan Warisan with regards to conservation as a general matter, which is give the macro view, whilst Anand later will present on a micro situation where we are talking about specific heritage structures in Malaysia. So without further ado, I'll go straight into my slides. Can you see the page? Is it been shared? Can you see what I've shared?
Yes, Architect
The
Lim.
poster.
Can?
Yeah, the first page of your slide.
Yeah, okay. So the title of what I'm going to speak about is Built Heritage Conservation, and the subtitle is actually Intangible Values, the Viability of Conservation, and the Sustainability, especially in the context of this current rather homogeneous global village. We've talked about the world becoming like almost like a village where everything's ubiquitous, everything's the same. I mean, we eat the same food. Where you can see McDonald's everywhere and KFCs. You drink the same things. You watch the same football game. You know, anywhere from different corners of the world. You drive in same types of cars. You use the same mobile phones. In fact, we're using WebEx or Zoom or whatever. The same software. I mean, the world is becoming very, very small. It's like a global village, speaking a common language. And because of that, it's getting a bit more homogeneous. And so the value of being unique or being special is slowly being eroded. Now, let's go straight to the point. Why are we conserving heritage buildings? What's so special about them? Why do we bother to even do that? I would posit 2 positions. One is we want to preserve the legacy of buildings which we have inherited from previous generations. Now, we want to preserve it for posterity. These buildings we have inherited from our forefathers, right? Second thing is we want to record physically these relics or remnants of various civilizations which previously existed on Earth. so as to learn from the knowledge gained and collective wisdom of humanity. In previous generations, previous civilizations, they had to live with the conditions of Earth, Mother Earth at that time, and they adapted their shelters to accommodate the changes in weather. So in the context of the past, people in the past built sustainably, and it was in accordance with regional climatic conditions. Now, here is an example of the Malay house in the Nusantara, which is Southeast Asia. The diagram at the top is just a diagrammatic showing a typical Malay house, which is elevated off the ground. And so there's a lot of cross ventilation through the building. These are features which were adapted to accommodate the hot tropical weather. Pitch roofs with large overhangs to allow for a quick evacuation of water off the roof of the building, throw it away from the building. Now the building is raised on stilts, which allow for cross ventilation below the main floor, and mainly because of flooding, and also the building sits very lightly on the ground. It is not a fixed foundation. You can actually lift the whole building up, but it sits on a stone base, very lightly. It's sitting gently on the ground. Now, you'll notice that the whole structure is timber with clay tiles roofs at the top. Now, the picture at the bottom shows one of Badan Warisan's Malaysia's own building, which we acquired and restored. It was a dilapidated house somewhere in Perak, which was brought down to the grounds of Badan Warisan at the moment in Kuala Lumpur in Stoner Road, and it was restored and rebuilt. The parts which were damaged were reconstructed. But it's a very special house because it housed the local courts. There was a headman, Jabu who was also acted as the sort of magistrate for the area. So there's little attachment by the side where he had his office. But you can see that the building is very permeable, perforated at the lower panels above the door. The windows are jalousies. They have louvered windows, which allow a very easy ventilation across the house. Very, very cool. Now, the thing to note is that these natural building materials were sourced locally with zero carbon footprints. I mean, nowadays there's all this talk about sustainability and the carbon footprint. Yes, as an architect, one could order, place an order for Brazilian stone, or a Norwegian granite. You could have things from anywhere in the world, but just think of the carbon footprint to transport the item to this part of the world to put into your building. Is it worth the effort now? So here, these buildings are highly sustainable because they had zero carbon footprint. They just used things that were around the area. Of course, some of the tiles later on were imported from India and elsewhere. That's another story. Now, the lessons we can learn from these old inherited buildings are priceless. There's no price to it, but they are perfectly relevant in today's discussion because we're talking about how to conserve these buildings and what is it relevant in our modern context of modern living. Now, in the case of tourism, tourism is the biggest money spinner and the largest industry throughout the whole world. Okay, we're talking about world tourism. All of us want to travel. We travel to see the great wonders of the world, to look at how other people lived in the past and the present. And then how do we see that? We see that through the built environment. What did they build? What shelters did they made? So you see the great buildings they've constructed and the architecture which has survived through thousands of years of strife, war, and in peaceful times. Now, be they very assuming vernacular architecture. Earlier on, I talked about the Malay house, which is a folk sort of architecture, vernacular, or rather highfalutin, rather pretentious architecture practiced as a fine art. Now, nowadays, we are sent to architecture school to learn to design architecture with concepts, with very sophisticated ideas of proportion, harmony, scales, and so on and so forth. That is studying it as a fine art. Whereas vernacular architecture, it was through the craftsmen who adapted their skills. I mean, you had somebody who was a timber worker, you had somebody who was a metal worker, you know, and they worked together. They had their guilds, and when you wanted a house, there was no architect involved. You just tell them, I want how many room house, and they'll produce it for you. Skills are all there. So I just showed this picture of the most visited monument or heritage building in India. Okay, the Taj Mahal. Now the Taj Mahal is the draw. I mean, the most people throughout the whole of India, with so many monuments and beautiful buildings and so on. It is the Taj Mahal, and this is a view of it showing the Chahar, which is this four-quartered square garden done by the Mughals when they operated from Agra as a capital. So this is a view at ground level. You can see the formal laid out gardens, and it's a beautiful building. There's no question about it. You know, would you imagine somebody saying, let's knock it down and put a multi-story shopping complex there? No way, Jose. Nobody would think of them doing that. Why are we saving it? Because it is a beautiful work of art. Now, this is not a mosque. This is actually a mausoleum. It's a tomb. And there's this romantic narrative that it was Shah Jahan who built it for his beloved wife, Mumtaz. And so this is a monument to his love for her. You know, she used to accompany him on his military campaigns, you know, throughout India. But the thing is, when you look at the average building like this, you know, here's another view from across the river Jamna, and it's almost like a mirage. It's a beautiful, fabled building. You know, it's like a dream palace, a dream fairy tale castle, or whatever. But these are the high points of a society where you express your art. Now, another aspect of conserving heritage buildings is what I term as a sense of place. A sense of place has been defined by this writer, Rebecca Solnit, as it is a sort of sixth sense. You know, inside you there's an internal compass and a map which is made by memory and spatial perception all together, working together. So when you go to any corner of the world, you feel there's a sense of being in that place and not anywhere else. Now, this is why all buildings have a tremendous sense of place. You can place it where it is on the globe. Whereas the current situation is ubiquity. Ubiquity is where it's everywhere. It's very common. It's all over the whole world. It's exactly the same. Every city looks the same because it's high-rise towers. Now, let's explore the idea here. So what is this sense of place? Now, if I showed you this photograph, you immediately get this image of the shelter. It could be cloisters in the monastery in Europe. And then there's a quadrangle. There's a courtyard in the middle open to the sky. You may see some smaller versions of it, say, you know, in a convent built by the Thessalian mission or whatever. But the point is that you would not think of it being in a tropical setting, really. This is more European, the detailing, the shape, the form. Yeah. So here's a locality in America. You're driving along a country road, and this is the season of autumn. It's the fall, and all the beautiful russets, the gold, the color of the leaves, all the leaves, the deciduous trees will be shed, and it's this golden, very beautiful scenery. Now, when you look at a picture like that, you imagine you are in a temperate climate, you are in a different time zone, and so on. Now, to me, hold on, let's go back. Yeah, to me, cities are living entities. Okay, you cannot, and it's growing organically. There's this draw. Everybody leaves the countryside to go to the town, to the urban complex, to earn a living, find some employment. And so cities which started very, very small, like in the case of London, is more than 1,000 years ago in the center of that plan, where there's a river Thames that wriggles its way through. It grew organically, left side of the river, right side of the river. There are two cities there. There's a city of London. There's also city of Westminster. And then all around on the outskirts, and there were villages. You had Greenwich Village, you had, you know, Highgate, and so on and so forth. So the point is, a city is growing, it's a living entity. It cannot just be forced to be kept, contained or poured in formalin and put a preservative and then you just preserve it and do not touch it. It becomes like a showcase. It's no longer a living city. And that's where we try and avoid in conservation. We should be a living city. So sorry. So heritage buildings and districts should be conserved by injecting a new lease of life through adaptive reuse of old building stock, so they don't lose their sense of place. So that's the general attitude. So in the case of Kuala Lumpur, I'm zooming back to KL now. KL Central Market is an example, a case in point. In around 1988, it was destined to be knocked down and replaced by a twin tower, of Gaya Bumi across the river. But because there was a recession and things were very quiet in the building industry, there was a stay of execution, and an enterprising entrepreneur from Singapore, Dr. Kopo Singh, teamed up with Abdullah of the Krishnan, and they Hatta Bumi developed this single largest room in Kuala Lumpur, which was a wet market, and it was built in the 1930s into a cultural market. It became an arts and crafts center. There were restaurants, there were eateries, and so on and so forth. So within this very large, the biggest room in Kuala Lumpur, they inserted new interventions in there. So they were basically inspired at that time in the 80s, where in London there was Covent Garden, in Boston there was this Panmure Hall Marketplace, and there's Pier 41 in San Francisco. There was a halt to whole-scale urban destruction. In those days, post-war, they felt there was the need to clear all these slum areas or really degraded areas and build a new future. But in 1988, the tide had turned. The locals were vehemently against it. They say London will lose its character, its history. So they fought, and they succeeded. So the renewal was now to use more conservative, more sensitive interventions by inserting things that will strengthen the worn-out urban fabric. So we talk about inner city decay, where there was a bombed out site, or the building was burned out, it was burned down, or it was just left derelict and became a ruin. So these are inner city decay. So what you do is you reinforce that old urban fabric by stitching in sensitive new enterprises, in the form of development like this. So this architectural rehabilitation of older urban fabric was thus achieved by injecting a new lease of life. And so now let's again zoom out to the macro situation, where if I showed you a picture like this, you will look at the signs, you try and read the language, and no price for guessing, it's actually Japan. Now this is modern Japan. This is probably in Ginza or something like that. Look at the neon lights, look at something. There's a sense of place. It is not in any other part of the world. A lot of neon, a lot of glitz, and it's a very sort of hectic place. So these are other pictures. So I didn't put any annotation below these pictures, but you can see the scene. There are these two lovely girls in the kimono carrying an umbrella, and they are just walking along here in this case, a back lane, one of the smaller back lanes in an old town, probably Kyoto, with lanterns and all that. Now, the sense of place is palpable. You can feel it. This is not Malaysia. This is not, say, Batu Pahat or something like that. This is in a foreign land. The language, the signage, the little artifacts to decorate the street, the paved roads, the scale of the buildings, the narrowness of the street. All these lends to all the signs that tells you that this is, in our case, we know it's in Japan. These are the pictures of, fine architecture, traditional architecture. In the case of here, these are temples, and people are visiting it rather than the earlier vernacular architecture. Now, elsewhere, if you go to a place like Bali, for instance, you get the fabled rice fields, beautiful countryside scene. You know, the sunsets are spectacular, but there'll be buildings in the middle of these rice fields where they live there. The people who tilled the land and planted paddy, they lived in those houses, and barns were there. But in this context, the Balinese had a Hindu cosmology. They had a different attitude to life on Earth. So they built houses as a series of pavilions, small little pavilions in an enclosed courtyard. That's not a house, but it's similar in that regard. But here is a axonometric of a temple complex, what they call a pura in Bali, for the Hindu temple. So at the front part, you have what's called a split gate. It's as if the gate has been split asunder, and you go through. When you go through this split gate, you are entering another realm. You're entering an inner realm, a spiritual realm from the outside. So you'll notice that the carvings on the outside are very elaborate and very ornate, but where it's sliced in half, there's no decoration on the sliced portion. It's as if that thing is cut in half and you're walking through like Alice through the looking glass. Now, the other sort of architecture in Bali also very fascinating, because here are high multi-tiered pagoda-like structures, which talks of Mount Meru. You know, it symbolizes Mount Meru and the mountains in the background. And here are other examples, multi-tiered roof forms, you know, in the Pura. And in the front courtyard, there the Hindu adherents doing their prayers in front. So the buildings will tell you that it's in a very exotic part of the world. The architecture is of very different materials. They're atap roofs, not clay tiles, a wooden structure, and very sophisticated culture, because we do multi-story buildings like that. And when you go closer to a typical building, the traditional buildings, you'll find there's very ornate sculptures. It's telling a story of what it's all about. In this case, there's a portal guardian, a Kala, who is depicted with hands and teeth and so on and so forth. But you can see it's very elaborate and very deep carving. So then you may go to an entrance door, for instance, like this. Again, very ornate, beautifully detailed and carved with gold colors and so on. In the rural part of Bali, in Indonesia. Now, in the case of conservation, one of the principles we want to talk about is authenticity. You have inherited an original building. There's no copy of it. This is the real McCoy. Here in China, they try to simulate heritage. You know, they try to do a bit of place making. Now, in architectural schools, now in planning schools, there's this word which is used a lot. They call it place making, to create a sense of place. So here they tried to do that. They did a mini version of the Eiffel Tower, 1/3 its size. They built these blocks, like Paris, you know, one of the boroughs of Paris. And here, this one is in Tian to Cheng, which is a suburb of Hangzhou in China. This failed miserably. Now, this was done by developers, very luxurious developers. And it's a bit like a ghost town now, hardly anybody there. But in the past, they used it as backdrops or wedding shots and so on and so forth. Now, the idea is that you're longing for something else. You're trying to create a dreamlike setting, a fantasy land, not the real thing. Now, in conservation, we don't believe in that. That is a con job. That is a fake. You know, it's not real. You have to be authentic. Even in your conservation work, you try and use as much of the original material as possible. So this is what I meant here when I say authenticity is vital in heritage buildings, not Disneyland fantasies or a glamorization of a distant past. Now, the picture on the left shows Disneyland, at the original Disneyland in Anaheim, in LA, in the US. This was a fantasy castle, Snow White's castle, which was based on some German Bavarian examples in Europe. But the chap who imagined this, you know, built this fairy tale castle, and there's Sleeping Beauty is there, and so on and so forth. So that That is the original Disneyland, but there are now Disneylands in Tokyo, in Paris, in Hong Kong, and elsewhere. So you could create this, but to me this is very pseudo, very mock, not the real thing. But yes, as a theme park, fine, but not in the context of historic core of any old ancient cities or buildings. On the right side, you see a little photo of an open hearth in medieval homes. Now, in medieval times, 500-600 years ago, those Europeans were living in sort of timber huts and wattle and daub mud walls, and the floor was just dirt floors. If they're lucky, they can put some stones, but they'll have an open fire on the hearth in the middle of the house. So you can imagine all the smoke that went up. And this was before the days of that somebody invented a chimney to let the heat out and the smoke out. So the whole place is just smoke filled. I think that when you do a restoration or do a conservation job on this, you should not glamorize it. Do not make it better than what it was. Just accept it as that. People are perfectly happy with it. They live the privations of it. Don't overdo the conservation aspects. Now, back here in KL, we have this situation of this is a confluence of two rivers. This is the birthplace of Kuala Lumpur, where there's a Gombak River on the left and there's a Klang River on the right. But the two becomes one at this confluence. Now, the story about how KL came about was that in 1857, a group of miners came upstream from the royal port of Klang, upstream to prospect for tin. They alighted somewhere on the left, on the bank there, and then they found tin, in other areas, in Ampang, one district, in Sungai Besi, and so on. So this is the historic view of so-called the confluence of two rivers, and Lumpur meaning mud, so Kuala Lumpur is this muddy confluence. Now, just in front, right in the middle, just slightly off to the right, is this mosque, the Masjid Jami. It's a Friday mosque, a beautiful apparition, sort of mirage in town, designed by an Englishman. His fantasy idea of a mosque. Now, the scale last time was very domestic, very small scale, single-story building with 3 domes in the middle, and then some minarets, and the skyline was beautiful. But you can see the setting. The setting was, it was in a very bucolic green setting with coconut trees and even banana palms on the side. Now, can you imagine you're upstream about 50 miles from the coast and you've got coconut palms, Along the way, the banks of the river were concreted over to help the drainage and irrigation department to help clean up the mud. They have to use excavators to pick up the silt and the rubbish that lands on that river. So this was the view last time, where you can see this setting of this beautiful mosque, Moorish sort of fantasy, but it had palm trees, coconut palms swaying right in the middle of Kuala Lumpur, right at the center of the historic core. And the lower picture shows where it's very, very green. You cannot see it from that side. Now, recently, the City Hall, in its infinite wisdom, decided to upgrade the river, and they spent a lot of money, I think $1 billion over ringgit, to upgrade the river in this project called the River of Life. So, but sadly for me, they did something which was a bit awkward. They removed all the coconut palms. They removed most of it, and so the whole building is now very barren, a bit like a desert. And right in the forecourt, they've also introduced date palms from the Middle East. So it's quite an alien this landscape of before. And the idea was that this was part of this beautification program, which went the entire length of the river further downstream as well. And they installed a light and sound sort of experience, with special lighting and fountains and colored lights changing. So at night, you could have a sight and sound vision of this historic place. Now, unfortunately, all these came to naught recently in our floods. Just a few days ago, this is what happened. The entire river was just flooded over. So my point is that you have to learn from history. You don't build in the river. The river would overflow. This is the low point where your flood is banks. But they spend all the money now. It's gone to waste. All that would have been either swept away by the currents or would have been damaged. I mean, with all the silt and dirt. So this River Life project was, I felt, founded on rather odd ideas. They didn't take into consideration the wisdom of the past. Where you don't build on a river bank, you build higher up to avoid the floodplain. Now, KL has got its own character. Again, as I said, the sense of place. Now, the skyline here, this is depicted by a graphic artist, and he's put in some silhouettes of interesting buildings that identifies where Kuala Lumpur is in terms of the world. And the Twin Towers, Petronas Twin Towers by Cesar Pelli, this Argentinian architect, it actually virtually put Kuala Lumpur on the map of the world. And of course, on the right-hand side, there is this tall radio mast in Kinanas on the hill there, and telecommunications tower. But this is the skyline of Kuala Lumpur depicted graphically. And in real life, this is what you see. You see the Twin Towers, you see the telecommunications, right? And all these pinnacles, all these tall, modern constructions, modern buildings, city of towers. In the foreground, there's the old part of Kuala Lumpur. This is an old kampong, an old village, right in the heart of town, where the value of the land has gone up. There's an economic drive, and there's this real estate appreciation of value. So the pressures are on to clear away the old and redevelop this whole middle area to match what's across the river on the other side, this modern edifices in Kuala Lumpur. Now, let's look at other skylines. Here is Hong Kong. Again, it looks like any other modern city. There's no character from the far, except one or two iconic buildings. The one on the left is the Bank of China by the late I.M. Pei. And then there are some other towers, the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank, somewhere in the middle. Now, the skyline of KL and the skyline of Hong Kong, they're all modern towers laid down in streets, so like stacks of flowers in a vase. So here's a view of skyline from the higher ground looking downwards. In the center is the Bank of China, but you can see that it's just very ubiquitous, very similar looking matchboxes on stilts. Here's another skyline in Shanghai. So where's the sense of place? I mean, unless you know the buildings, there's a World Trade Center and there's that building in the center, the telecommunications tower. You have no idea where it can be. It can be any city, a modern city in the world. Sense of glass towers. Here's one of Singapore. Now downtown on the right, Shenton Way and all that. Again, the same ubiquitous modern glass towers of steel and concrete and so on. But it's inherited recently, is built two iconic buildings. One would be that the three stumps and this amazing hotel complex with a casino below ground, and right in the foreground there's this durian sort of shaped National Theatre sort of performance area. But the point is that without these two iconic buildings identified, if I took your picture and you are not familiar with Singapore, you wouldn't know where it is. Now, in the foreground, there is this cricket ground, which is the Padang, which is in front of the old administrative buildings, plus the cricket club there. Now, recently, Singapore is only a very young country. It became a republic by itself in 1965 when it left the Federation of Malaysia. And because it's such a young country, it's 60 years old or so, most of the buildings were new. So here is a classic case of, there was this 1970s building done in the brutalist style, where it's raw concrete and so on, called the Golden Mile Complex in Singapore. Over the years, like, as I said, the estate value of downtown urban centers goes sky high. So there's a tremendous pressure to buy up all the ownership of this thing as a block sale, and then to demolish the building and build a new skyscraper. But the locals were against it, especially those in architectural circles. They felt that this was a very special building. It was an iconic building. It led the way in terms of a modern style of building, similar in that architectural movement called the Metabolist movement, started in Japan. So here's a view of the same building from the front, where it's this triangular slope. Series of apartments below is the shopping complex. So here's a cross section. It shows you how the tall pillars and how the light is brought in by this shaft of light on the left, entering the inner atrium of that complex. This building has become so iconic that after 2 years of study, the Singapore government decided to list it and preserve it. So to compensate for the loss of that building, for the developer to make money from there, they decided that they would allow them to do on the bottom left, this block of building here, they can knock it down and build a high-rise building on that spot. So they transfer the development ratio, the plot ratio, onto that little bit in front. So in the history of a country, you're talking about, it's a very young country, 60 years. So the building in the 70s it's as old as a nation, you know, it's about 10 years younger than a nation. If it's vital, you have to preserve it, you have to conserve it, to tell the story of how Singapore came to being and how it prospered and became now one of the first world countries, very, very rich, so on. So now let's go to another part of the world where here's an old part. This is Italy. And here you're having an aerial view of Rome. You can see this type of building, the construction, the grand avenues, the axial planning, the piazzas, and so on. This is a view from St. Peter's, looking down at the colonnade, and then looking down the long avenue straight down there. So these buildings are from the Renaissance. They're about 500-600 years old. You get this sense of place. I mean, this is not Singapore, for instance. This is not Japan, as I showed earlier on. So we have to create buildings or really preserve something, try and preserve that sense of place. These buildings came about because of climatic conditions, the shape, the form, the style of building. Now, again, jumping back to Malaysia, we are now approached the skyline of Georgetown, Penang. Now, Penang is a historic core, and again, you see this new constructions coming up, high rises, puncturing through the historic core. The character of the old is slowly being eroded because what is replacing it are this very ubiquitous, very anonymous, very plain, to my mind, very plain high-rise blocks, you know, mixed use with condominiums, with offices and so on, commercial use. Now, Georgetown was very special because together with the city of Malacca, it was jointly inscribed by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site. Now, this was in July 2008. And what it means is that Georgetown is of great significance, together with Malacca, as something that belongs to not just Malaysia, it belongs to the world at large. There's this World Heritage. There's a very special conjunction of people from different parts of the world, from Arabia, from India, from, you know, Nusantara and so on, Chinese, all sorts of people came from Armenia even to Georgetown, and they created this town with this rich history. Of course, Malacca is much older with 600 years of history. But anyway, this has been inscribed. So with this inscription, it has a lot of restrictions on development because we want to conserve this character, this sense of place. And so here's a view of a typical street, you know, which has been left with this patina of old age, where the building looks old, you know, it's still lived in, and then you see the signs of life. There are stalls by the side, the windows are open, there's this cross ventilation with the jalousies. Some of the front windows have been replaced with green glass panes instead of the old thing. So the idea is that this historic core of Penang is full of these old shop houses. They are unique. They are not available anywhere else, not even in Kuala Lumpur. They're specific to Penang, but the elements of the construction are similar with other towns. There's this 5-foot way. Some of these are houses, not necessarily commercial offices. But you can see the way they decorated the facade. It's a 2-story building.
Okay, Architect Lim Teck Bane, we have a few more minutes.
Okay, I'll run through very fast. So Georgetown, here's the Armenian street scene. Now heritage buildings are just left to rot. I mean, these are worth about $300 million worth of it left to rot in Penang. So here's a section through the construction showing the elements that make up these old shop houses. Here's a street which has been prettified with pastel colors and nice maintenance. Here's a fine building, fine piece of architecture, which is the Peranakan Mansion. And then here are the streets in the center. So the character of the town is very clear and very obvious, and people just love to browse through these old buildings, the old world charm. Inside on the right side is where the living quarters are like, wooden floors with the light coming in with ventilation. So now what are the conservation values you're talking about? You're talking about this unique selling point of priceless heritage. You want to enhance the ambience of these historic precincts. So how do you do that? You must appreciate the patina of old age. If you completely change it to something modern, the idea of this weathering is lost. Then you must use adaptive reuse with sensitive remodeling. The appropriateness of the scale as well as the materials used and the use of the building. Now recently, there was one portion of early part of December. There's a mega development being put up by Penang to knock down all these old government quarters which were built in the 20s and replace it with high-rise condominium, 600 units or so. So this whole area has been threatened. Now in Malaysia, we have a stock of amazing buildings in all sorts of contexts. In another part of town, this is Ipoh, you have cave temples, where people build dwellings inside the cave temple, monasteries and so on. So here's one in this limestone setup. Inside the cave temple, some artifacts. Then, of course, because Malaysia was ruled by Britain, there were the heritage of colonial architecture brought from Europe. So this is a railway station in Ipoh. This is some Ipoh town hall done in the Palladian style. Then, of course, in the downtown part of Ipoh, you still have this whole ambience of Chinese shop house streets done in painting. We also have what's called industrial heritage, where Malaysia was the world's largest producer of tin, as well as rubber. But when the tin market collapsed and people left the industry, you have these relics which are like tin dredge, which are kept now and converted into museums or used as features in theme parks. So this is a tin mining museum, which tells the story, the narrative of how Malaysia became the world's largest producer of tin. These are examples of it. So the Kinta Valley in Ipoh is where a lot of the towns were built because of tin, because of the richness of tin. So thank you. I'm ready to accept any questions if you have later.
Okay, thank you, Architect Lim Teck Bane. Have not seen you for the past 2 years, of course.
Yes.
Look forward to meet you in person in Kuala Lumpur for a cup of coffee, probably. Yeah. Okay, we running out of time, so we have to rush to the next speaker. Over to you. There will be definitely question for you, Architect Lim Teck Bane.
Okay.
There will be in the question and answer session. Okay. Over to you, Dr. Shira.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me just share the slides of the brief. Just hang on, yeah. Okay. Okay, our next presenter is the council member from Badan Warisan, Mr. Architect Anand Krishnan. Is also has well-versed in heritage conservations. He has been working with the various of companies with regards to architects, and also has become one of the was a chief editor of art, a director of Architecture Asia in 2001, 2004, and has been teaching senior design studio in local and overseas university for over 10 years. He is currently a council member of Badan Warisan Malaysia since 2019 and was a former independent director 2018 until 2021 by appointment on the board of Pusat Binaan Sdn, which oversees Pertubuhan Arkitek Malaysia PM. So let's listen to a presentation by our last keynote speakers, Architect Anand Krishnan. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Where are my slides? Yeah, okay, good. All right, good. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anand Krishnan, as has been said, and I'm an architect and urban designer. I'm running my own firm in Kuala Lumpur. I'm here as a council member of Badan Warisan Malaysia. Before I begin, I'd like to thank Dr. Alice and Dr. Shaharia for their invitation for us to be here today. There's simply not enough talks and webinars on matters relating to heritage. And today's webinar is warmly appreciated. Thank you so much. I've titled my talk as Saving the Highlands, the Built Heritage of Hill Towns and Hill Stations. I find this a fascinating area of research, and I hope you do too. Next. Right. Hill towns and hill stations are at the margins of the built heritage universe. They're not mainstream and there's really no spotlight on them much. This lack of attention has meant that they are marginalized and often forgotten. It is so much easier to focus on built heritage in easier parts of any city. But in Europe, hill towns with their long histories have had a lot of success. Hill towns like this one on the screen. In Malaysia, we don't have that many, and so the few that we have are not talked about much. In my talk, I wish to bring attention to this imbalance and hopefully build up interest on these special places. Next. Okay, to start the talk, I'd like to briefly touch on the whole idea of built heritage. All the three speakers before me have spoken about it, and I'm sure, no, the back one, I'm sure many of you would already understand what heritage and built heritage and conservation and cultural heritage, all these terms mean. But what I want to really mention here is that this whole notion of built heritage is very subjective. Different groups who are in this game of saving old things. No, go back. I'll tell you when to, I'll say next. So the different groups that agree, they have to agree as to what constitutes heritage. That's another big conversation. They need to agree on what exactly needs to be saved, how much money is going to be spent, and how long it's going to take. So all this is very, very subjective. And I hope that by the time the end of the presentation that I'm making, you'll have an idea of why I'm saying this, that it's subjective. It's all very time consuming. Next. So I've listed here what I consider the main players in heritage in Malaysia or anywhere in the world, and the first one is government. The government is a major player, you know, with the acts of parliament and you know, they can decide if a area gets torn down or anything, you know, through their own through their own planning processes. The next would be individuals. Individuals are very, very important. I'm talking about rich individuals who can afford to put in a lot of money into heritage conservation and things like that. Yeah. Royalty is also important. In Malaysia, royalty has a special place. I mean, we all love them very much, but they also have a business side of things, and that business side of things may sometimes affect how we save areas and buildings and all, so we need to understand how this works. And of course, finally, companies they sponsor things, they put in money, they have an advertising budget, they have a CSR program, so it's very important. There are many other agencies as well and parts. And everyone plays a part. Our agency, Badan Warisan, is one of the players. There's also ICOMOS, and there are other many smaller agencies that play a part in built heritage. Next. A few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to go to Kelantan, to Kota Baru, and to look at the work of a built heritage project called Masjid Kampung Laut. It's 400 years old, and it was about 50 years ago. It was facing a lot of damage, and it could be destroyed by floods. So it was decided, they approached the Kelantan government, and the Kelantan government agreed to the move, and they brought it to a higher ground. And few years ago, they decided to relocate it to back to its original location. And I was very, very impressed. There's so many players involved. There are architects, there are conservators, there's companies, there's the government, there's quasi-governments, Jabatan, Warisan was also involved. So these kind of efforts need to be pushed up. These kind of efforts need to be understood. Everyone should come to the table and discuss it. It's very subjective. You have to decide when exactly you want to bring back the old building to. Do you bring it back to its original condition, 100% restoration, or do you bring it back to maybe 60 years ago, maybe 60% of restoration? So these kind of decisions have to be discussed, and all the stakeholders and everyone who are passionate about heritage and conservation should come together and understand how to go about doing it. Then, hang on. Right, so can you move to the next slide, please? Thanks. So this was some of the pictures I took last week, and it's clearly it's not the same as the original. The roof tiles have been changed. They're not using the Singora tiles. They decided to use clay tiles because it's much more practical, but it still looks old, and so over time there'll be a patina. So it's this kind of decisions, but it's a great project, and I'm very sure that it will become a benchmark for built heritage projects in Malaysia. Next. Can you go back? Sorry, can you go back one? Yeah. One of the things I wanted to say, or rather, one of the players that I didn't mention, which is so important, is politics. It's an elephant in the room, and politicians are part of that equation, of that conversation. Now, I don't think we need to worry about them. I don't think that we should consider them as enemies or anything like that. But I think we need to deal with them. We need to we need to understand that they will always be around, and we must involve them in the whole process. We cannot just not involve them or fight with them and things like that. So I think politicians and politics are very, very important in this whole equation of heritage conservation. Next. some of the other things, Penang, as my colleague has mentioned, is like one big island of built heritage projects. There's so much happening there, and the government plays a lesser role, but there's a lot of patrons, a lot of rich individuals, a lot of companies who can work around all the existing issues and conserve, you know. So I think it's a great opportunity and for us, for the rest of Malaysia to learn from. Next. Now, in built heritage, essentially there's all these types of different buildings. There's pre-war shop houses. Next, there's there's Art Deco buildings, there's colonial buildings, religious buildings. There's so many different types of buildings. I like to call them as subsets, subsets to the bigger sets, and the bigger set is basically heritage, any building, you know, kind of thing. So hill towns and hill stations are essentially subsets. They're types of places. They're types of cities, smaller in scale than the big cities, but equally important to understand, equally important to know what we want to do with it, you know. So we need to approach heritage differently in these kind of conditions. Next. All right. Before I move on to the real area that I want to talk about, hill towns and hill stations, I'll just briefly talk about what makes them so, you know. So hill towns and hill stations are have essentially one condition that makes them what they are, and that's they're all elevated, they're all raised on high ground, they're all in high ground makes the microclimate much cooler and temperate. So they've been magnets where for people to go to, because it's hot in the summer and it's crowded in lower towns and towns by the rivers. So it's always so nice to go to a cooler climate on higher ground. So that's the main thrust of what hill towns are about, you know. And in medieval times, they were used as they were built as defenses to attacking armies and like Altomonte in Italy, you know, beautiful medieval city, hill town. And then other hill towns were built to next as religious or pilgrimage places. So they wanted that elevation so that it was different, and it had to be, you had to trek across great areas of land to get there, you know. So this is the stunning Mont Saint-Michel in France. So hill towns were like that, you know, and some of the best hill towns in the world are in Italy, in Tuscany and where's that? What area is that? Umbria, that's right. So hill town like Orvieto, next. Tortona, which I've showed you earlier, next. Next. And no, back. Yeah, this is one of the best hill towns ever. It's called San Gimignano, and it has many of these tall structures, which basically were the skyscrapers of the time, and so really beautiful, small, very picturesque, very Instagrammable. People go there. People love visiting these hill towns. There are lots of them, and one current favorite next is the stunning stone hill town of Matera, Italy. And I'm sure many of you have seen it. If you haven't seen it already, please go and see it. It's featured heavily in No Time to Die, James Bond. So the opening scenes were all filmed here and beautiful. So Matira. Yeah. Next we go to hill stations. Now hill stations are essentially smaller footprints of hill towns. So hill towns are already small. Hill stations are smaller. So and when you talk about hill stations, they were essentially places where you went to for retreats, and or it had it's a place as a refuge for if you wanted to get healthier or better. It had this medicinal value because it's cool. So the British did that in India when they were in India for a long time, and India has a lot of mountains and hills. So the British built a lot of hill stations. So one of the more famous ones is Shimla in India. Next. Darjeeling, also in India, very, very famous, very cool, very lovely to go to on the foothills of the Great Mountains. Next. Then you have Mathiran. Mathiran is also famous for its as a hill station for its medicinal values of going there, cooler climate. But it has many beautiful bungalows and too many to show. But I'm just picking two to this time around. But these should be saved and the built heritage aspect conserved and understood. Thanks. Next. In other parts of the world, there's Bane in Vietnam, Garut in Indonesia. Next. These are small, beautiful hill towns and hill stations. Katoomba in Australia, a very, very beautiful and picturesque town, beautiful old buildings. Next. Nuwara Eliya in Sri Lanka, lovely, lovely place, and very cool, great hotels. Sorry, you can change, yeah. And Ansirabe in Africa. Now, this is I haven't been there yet, but I'd love to go. It's well regarded for its old French influence. Which brings us to hill towns and hill stations in Malaysia. Hang on, don't change it yet. Malaysia, we don't have that many hill towns and hill stations. We have the huge Titi Wangsa ridge running from north to south in the middle of Malaya or West Malaysia. But someone's gone and made a study of all these existing places. So next. So there's Penang Hill, established in 1787, Maxwell Hill, 1884, Bukit Keledang in Perak, 1892, Treasure Hill in Selangor, 1893, Fraser's Hill in Pahang, 1919, Gurun in Kedah, 1920s, Cameron Highlands, 1925. Then post-independence, there's Genting Highlands, 1971, and Bukit Tinggi in Pahang, 1994. Now, hang on, don't change. If you look at this list, only Penang Hill, Fraser's Hill, and Cameron Highlands, the pre-independence hill towns, have got a urban form or a built form that can be saved. You know, Penang Hill is already under UNESCO, so it's quite. I mean, it's safe. Cameron Highlands has had too much development over the years of newer buildings and things like that. So it's going to be quite difficult to actually do a conservation master plan for it. But it is still, I mean, I believe we can still do it, you know. But Fraser's Hill is perhaps the best example of what can be done, you know. Genting Highlands and Bukit Tinggi are new hill towns, and Genting Highlands is all brand new buildings. So maybe it'll be worth saving maybe in about 80 years or 90 years time. Bukit Tinggi is brand new buildings, but mimicking old Tudor buildings. So again, this whole idea of authenticity and needs to be understood. Is it really worth saving and having a conservation master plan for brand new buildings? You know, so next. So here are some of the pictures. Penang Hill, beautiful bungalows on Penang Hill, old British bungalows that can be saved. Next. Gurun Kedah, like Kampa in Perak, lovely old shop houses that can be saved. Next. Cameron Highlands, as you can see, the high-rise buildings which don't quite fit into an older settlement, and then you have all the buildings down south. The traffic is really bad in Cameron Highlands right now, so saving all hill towns and hill stations require a concerted approach. We must consider all aspects: traffic management, open space management, trees and whatnot, footprints, building heights, you know, kind of thing. So a conservation master plan basically is about how to keep the old town, but to allow new interventions to come in as well, but to be done according to guidelines. Next. As you can see, Genting Highlands is very, very modern, contemporary, you know. So if you close your eyes or squint and don't look at all the green spaces around it, all the mountain areas, Genting Highlands could be anywhere. It could be in Kapong, it could be in Selayang, it could be, you know. So the question arises, I mean, is it an old hill town or that needs to be saved? It's unique in that sense. It's a modern metropolis built on the top of a mountain. Yeah. Next. Bukit Tinggi, as I've mentioned, these are all brand new buildings or pretty new buildings. The patterning, the skin of these buildings are all done to mimic Tudor and old English cottages and all, but the scale is different. It's not, these are all 4 or 5 stories, but the original buildings in Tudor styles were 2 to 3 stories. So it's these kind of questions that need to be asked and understood as to what we do next. You know? Next. So this brings us to Fraser's Hill. The next few slides are all about Fraser's Hill, and I want to talk about how we can go about saving it. It's a good example of it has a lot of things going for it, and so I want to draw your attention to these elements. Next. It was started in 1919 by English surveyor called Louis James Fraser, and the whole town is named after him, Fraser's Hill. And he went there on the understanding that there was tin. So he started the settlement. It's a tin mining settlement, and for the next 10 years or so, he actually, tin mining actually happened, and there was tin to be found, but the quantities were not big. So in about 10, 12 years, tin operations just ceased, and they left. But when they left, next, they had built small buildings. They had built, houses for quarters for staff, quarters for managers, and things like that. You know, so the early buildings of Fraser's Hill, some of it are still around, was done in the style of the arts and craft movement, which was popular in Britain at the time. So the arts and craft movement by William Morris was rejection of all the classical styles Gothic and whatnot. So they wanted to, William Morris wanted to introduce squiggles and leaves and you know, all that. So I'm sure many of you, I mean, you all would know about the arts and craft movement. It was very influential, and architects in Malaysia started following these designs. They started following house design. So this is a picture of a arts and craft house in England. So it was transplanted by English architects working in Malaya at the time, Malayan architects learning from them or working on their own. So over time, in the next 10, 12 years, Fraser's Hill started to get this look and feel of England. So it was called Little England. And as tin was no longer mined there, people started coming there as a hill station. They wanted a break from Kuala Lumpur, and it was getting that Little England look. It had scones and strawberries and tea, and it was quiet. It had soft lighting. So around the 40s, Fraser's Hill was like that. Now, the next slide just shows that it was also heavily influenced by the Garden City movement of Ebenezer Howard, which was also prevalent and trending in Britain right then. So Fraser's Hill in the 40s, 50s was very, very green, lots of trees, and it had a very green look to it, you know, and of course it was set in the middle of the Titiwangsa range. Next. So as you can see, some of the existing buildings and the green, you know, so it's got that look about it, you know. But of course, by the 70s, something strange happened. I mean, it was getting very, very popular. Restaurants were getting full, and there were not enough rooms. The road leading to Fraser's Hill was narrow, and so people found it hard to come here. And so once things were at its peak, it started to decline. And it declined simply because it couldn't cope with what was happening. KL was booming. So much was happening. It was now the 70s, and skyscrapers were being built. The old areas of KL were being torn down, and newer buildings were being built. And people didn't understand why Fraser's Hill couldn't keep up with that look, you know. So these are some of the houses there right now. So what happened next was a town in decline, you know. So the high rises started to be built. It was the older houses were being demolished, and you know, developers were keen to just mimic what was happening in KL, and they started building newer buildings which had no context whatsoever from a heritage point of view. Next. More demolition, and that led us, hang on to this, that led us to Malaysianization, what I call Malaysianization. It was essentially a lack of understanding, or a poor understanding of what Malaysia had. Malaysia had one of the few hill stations in the world that had a great number of arts and craft movement houses. It was influenced by the Garden City movement, you know. So people of that period didn't understand all that. They paid scant attention to heritage, and they just wanted to build brand new buildings. The architects of the time, I'm not saying anything, it's not a critic on them, but they were just pushing for a brand new Malaysia. So the buildings in Fraser's Hill of that period are all concrete, tall, without any regard to history at all, you know. So next slide. So what is happening right now, which brings us to Fraser's Hill today. Don't move, just let's stick on this slide. Raub Council is entrusted with the draft structure plan. Now, the draft structure plan is part and parcel of the Town and Country Planning Act. And the Town and Country Planning Act is a static act. It's not been refreshed, or it's not been updated or anything. I mean, I'm not criticizing the act itself. I'm just saying that it's not keeping up with the times, you know. So if you go to any town, small town, Mantian in Negeri Sembilan, you go to Kemaman in Terengganu, you go to Alostar in Perlis, you go to Raub in Pahang, they all look the same. They have terrace shop houses, they have mama shops at the corner. If you squint your eyes, you could imagine yourself in any place. The proposals in the draft structure plan for Fraser's Hill has terrace shops. Next, it has food halls for local Malaysian food in an all English heritage town. It has next. It has open car parks. When we need to think as planners and architects, we need to think how parking can be hidden and put aside so that the built form stands out taller. But the proposals in the draft structure plan has this. Next. It also has fast food joints, which can be anywhere in Malaysia. Next. It has more fast food joints for drive-ins. So and the most the thing that you can change it. The thing that really gets to me is they want to propose putting an entrance archway into Fraser's Hill, as if it needs one. You know, so hang on, don't change. So the draft structure plan, or the Town and Country Planning Act, for better or worse, relies too heavily on a process that where one plan fits all. So the Raub Council or the Kemaman Council, they're reading the same processes, and they're doing the same processes. They're making the same plans. You know, so that's how it is. You know, so where do you change? You can't blame the people at the Majlis Daerah Raub, because they're doing their job. But this brings me to the players of the heritage equation of the game. Those players, the governments, the individuals, the companies, the royalty, you know, and all agencies, heritage agencies like Badan, Warisan, we all need to come together and ask, is this what we want for a hill town that we don't have that many of in Malaysia? I mean, is this what we want? Is this how we want to move forward, you know? Now, Malaysia is blessed with so many different towns: coastal towns, hill towns, small towns, lake towns, colonial towns, Malay towns. They can all be master planned differently. They can all be done sensitively, and we can understand the nuances. We can understand what makes it different, and we can have it different. We don't have to make every place the same. Even the colors of the terrace shop houses, you go to Kemaman or Johor Bahru and all, it's the same. It's a light yellow or a light white or some pink or whatever. It's high time that we change our thinking about all this, and I want to impress upon everyone here, and hopefully elsewhere too, that we have the tools, and a place like Fraser's Hill is not too heavily destroyed that we cannot save it anymore. It's still possible to actually keep it English. Now, that's another issue, you know. Are we afraid of different parts of our history? Are we afraid of Indian influences in how we evolved? Are we afraid of the English, the little England that came here? I mean, yes, colonialism has its dark sides, and it's quite, there's a lot to write about. But when we look at the built environment side of things, we don't have to be afraid of them. We can showcase them. We can keep the British colonial architectural history. We can keep the Little England arts and craft movements influences. I mean, it's not wrong. And I hope Jabatan, Warisan and other government agencies understand that, diversity in heritage is something important and something significant that can be celebrated and can be made important without losing our multiracial identity. So next.
We have
Yes, I'm about to finish. Yeah, so I just want to quickly run through the all those points in Fraser's Hill. William Morris's arts and craft movement, which is a special place in Fraser's Hill, the old houses. Next. The Garden City movement, the tin mining legacy. Fraser's Hill was also involved in the emergency and the Federated Malay States, next, and also independence. So the conclusion, I'd like to read a statement I wrote. So the first question we may ask is, do we really need to save hill towns and hill stations? The answer is a clear yes. These places are unique because of the histories, because of how they evolved, because of who went there, the buildings that were built, etc. These hill towns and hill stations are special places deserving of special attention. Their morphology, character, and identity are different to the generic town or city. We cannot apply the same metrics or standards we apply for the generic town or city. For all these reasons, they should be given special consideration and saved. The corollary is strong. If we don't save them, we lose them. That said, many hill towns in the world are indeed being or are already being saved in that they have strict development restrictions. So any new building renovations or adaptive reuses must follow precise heritage guidelines. Malaysia must learn from these examples and precedents. Malaysia must save our old highlands. They are part of our heritage. I'll end, next slide, with one of the most beautiful pictures of hill towns, Matera, and the title of the James Bond film, Hill Towns and Hill Stations, No Time to Die. Thank you.
Thank you, Architect Anand, Krishnan. Fascinating. You have brought to light hill station and hill towns that often been seen isolated because they are up there and further away from the so-called civilization. So they are often being neglected. And if anything happened to them, not many people knows about it. Okay, we come to question time. We come to question time. I know that we are running out of time, but this room is filled up with very enthusiastic participants and viewers. I'm sure they look forward with the question and answer and respond from the two speakers. So, any question from the audience? Dr. Shaira, do you have one?
We don't have one. Perhaps that maybe
Yeah, we have here.
Let's see.
Okay, let me read. This is from Hanis Naizura. This is for Architect Lintik, Bane, and as well as Architect Anand. Both of you can give a response. In your opinion, what do you think is the best practice to integrate new development in a historical city or heritage area, since new development is inevitable for economic growth? Because in most cases, the developer will just tear down the old buildings to make way for the new development And as a practicing architect, sometimes we are torn between the client's needs / ambition and the ideas on integrating new development while preserving the historical identity. Azmi, you would like to start?
Yeah, I could start on that. Now, I feel that there must be two conditions before any new building is built where there might be some old buildings. The first is a group of people, heritage groups, Jabatan, Warisan, or anything. We need to come to the table together and agree that there's certain heritage value for old buildings. Now, some old buildings don't have heritage value, or they have lesser heritage value. So once this old, we all sort of agree. So that means in the master plan of local councils and all, it's color coded that there are certain old buildings in that area. Now, once that is done, the second condition is that when a new developer wants to build something, he cannot just build, he cannot just tear it down because it's got that heritage value order on it, you know. So he must be given incentives to help him make sure, to help him to ensure that his commercial motives are also met. I mean, he has his own rights as well, you know. So in that sense, adaptive reuse is perhaps one of the most powerful ways to save old buildings. That means you can do a modern intervention inside or even outside in such a way that it allows the older building to also be understood and looked at, but it also allows the new intervention to be fitted in like a glove. So in that sense, I think we need to do that. The problem here, I from my own experiences, is that first condition is not really understood. The agencies like Jabatan, Warisan and all, they've got very, very clear guidelines as to how they go about nominating buildings and all. You know? So the ad hoc types of suggestions for older buildings or older neighborhoods and all might not be under their purview of work. And since they are all belonging to private owners and all, it becomes hard to actually say that it's important. So that's why it's so significant and in my view important that the government steps in and understands that heritage nominations doesn't have to be black and white. It can be, there might be allowances for flexibility and greater areas so that we can, when new developers come in, they don't have to be, I mean, they have to be governed by these. You know? Thanks. I hope that explains it. Yeah.
Okay.
My answer to that is look at other cities. Look at cities like London, for instance. My view is that cities should be allowed to grow, but when you're putting a new development, you got to do it very sensitively. If you go on the net, you check, London was bought up by a lot of foreigners. And what they did was that they couldn't build in these old Georgian squares and houses. They built underground. They built 3 floors below ground, you know, underground. They undermined, and there's a whole subterranean London. You know, they put a swimming pools and lower level basement too. So a lot of money has to be spent to put in sensitive new development within an old context. The other example I can think of is a company like Boberg. Boberg is a very big news agency. They are huge, okay? And they wanted to build a brand new headquarters building, which they did in the city of London. That building won the award for Building of the Year a couple of years ago. And it was a very sensitive insertion of a new building in a very old part of city of London. The scale was right. They broke down the massing into smaller groups, you know. So taking the lead from these two, when you insert in an old historic quarter, the plot of the land, each shop lot is one lot. But when you buy 4 or 5 of them or one whole row, and then you knock everything down and you build this big base, it destroys the main fabric. If you somehow keep the old plot, at least the front portion, the rooms behind the facade should reflect what is there. If there's a window, there should be a room behind there. Don't put a blind window there and pretend that there's nothing there. So I've seen a development in Penang where there's the whole chunk of town, about 10 shop roads in a row, and it was gutted inside and something new was put inside. But the point is that from the street, I can't walk off the street into the corridor because the corridor is all blocked up. I can't enter the shop individually. I have to go to the main entrances at the corners of the block. So my point is, yes, you have to accommodate new development, but it has to be very sensitively done. The scale must be right. It can be very modern, but just the scale, you break down the scale of the windows. For instance, the old windows that you see, the old traditional windows, were smaller pane, the big opening is broken down into smaller panes. And then over a period of time, glass became bigger and bigger. You can get float glass, very big panels. So a lot of young architects who don't understand how to do conservation, they replace those old windows and they tint the windows dark as well with dark mullions. So you don't see a window with subdivision, you see a big hole in the facade. It's the choice of colors, choice of material, the sensitivity. Let's break down the scale. Just go back to the old human scale. Everything was done in imperial scale, 8 feet by 4 feet, 4 by 8, not metric scale. So my point is, the city has to grow, but you have to be very sensitive about it. The choice of components. What is the adaptive reuse for? What is going to become? If it's inappropriate, then don't do it. Agree?
Can I add some another point, sir? Many cities with big heritage components or parts in their fabric have got something called a hierarchy of heritage streets. So basically, what this means is that they identify which are the primary streets with a lot of old buildings, and then it moves on to the next level of streets, and then it moves on further and further. So if a developer or an owner wants to build something in a minor street, he can do a lot more. He can build his new buildings much more than he could do in the primary streets, So that kind of sensitivity in terms of streets, understanding how streets work and understanding how old buildings, where they sit, must be applied in Malaysia. Like Raja Chulan has a lot of hotels and 70s hotel. I mean, it's a major street, and then when it goes to different parts of Chinatown and things, so we can understand how KL works as well. So in that sense, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm afraid we are running out of time. In fact, we have exceeded the time allocated for this, but we truly enjoy the presentation by all the speakers. As I said at the beginning, hopefully this not going to be the last. It's going to the first session and many series more to come. I would like, on behalf of the head of departments, Associate Professor Dr. Alice Sabrina, Dr. Shahira, and the rest of the academic members of Department of Architecture, University Technology Malaysia, we would like to express our sincere gratitude and thanks to all 4 speakers yang berusaha, Encik Muhammad Azmi bin Muhammad Yusof, Director General of National Heritage Department, who I know of his busy time being able to be with us, and Architect Tiong, Kian Boon, President of ICOMOS, Architect Lim Teck Bane from University Malaya, council members of Badan Warisan Malaysia, Architect Ananda Krishnan, also council members of Badan Warisan Malaysia. You have indeed been very good to us. I hope you don't mind coming again in the next invitation. We enjoy your talk. And I also would like to take this opportunity to record our thanks and appreciation to all participants, not only from Malaysia, from all our India, United Kingdom, Japan, and Indonesia in particular, for participating in this webinar series. So with that, I thank you very much. Apology for any inconveniences. I hope to meet you again in the next future. Stay tuned.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to the speakers, Architect Anand, okay, Architect Lim Teck Bane, Mr. Azmi, and also to Architect KB. Alright, so thank you so much to all. Terima kasih, jumpa lagi, and we will hope to see you again in year 2022 with the next International Webinar Cultural Heritage Session. So I will call in back the speakers to have a more longer time. Thank you so much. And wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you.
Ben, are you at home or what?
I'm at home.
Okay.
It's in home office now.
You still at UM?
No,
Oh.